Chapter 799. The Thaling left very quickly. It seemed that when Soren explored the upper levels of the arcane tower, they already had this plan. For some reason, these Thaling could not leave the arcane tower, so they had been waiting for Soren's arrival. If Soren did not agree to give them freedom, these Thaling might really fight to the death. Staying in the same place for thousands of years, probably only high-level alchemy creatures could bear it. If it were other intelligent creatures, they would have gone crazy long ago. Seeing these Thaling immediately open the portal to the outer plane and leave, Fallen, which was obviously a little bit hesitant, but in the end, she did not speak. This matter could only be decided, but fortunately, Soren had buried a clue to connect to the mechanical plane. Open the magic lock. Connect to the elemental pool. Open the demi-plane channel. Since he had the highest authority of the arcane tower, Soren immediately opened the magic lock. The magic lock required a lot of energy, and it could not be operated by the elemental pool of the arcane tower. At most, it could only be opened temporarily. After Soren activated the magic lock, he immediately said to Gloria, "You guys set up an energy transmission channel. Find a way to transfer the energy of the elemental furnace into the arcane tower." Gloria and Fallen, which also understood that this was the most important thing at the moment, so they immediately nodded and prepared to leave. The others were all wizards, and they were very curious about this, so they all followed him down one after another. Only the High Priestess stayed. She was a psionic warlock, and she was not very interested in arcane things. "My lord. Now that we have the arcane tower, Mordor City has the ability to fight against other gods." The High Priestess looked at everything in front of her and slowly said, "However, in my opinion, this arcane tower is not very advanced. Its floating ring has not been completed, and the network has not been established. I'm afraid it can only fight against weak gods. In the face of some powerful gods, it is still not very useful." Soren nodded and said, "I understand. But it is enough to have this foundation. The floating ring can be given to Gloria and Fallen, which to complete. With the elemental furnace, we can temporarily ignore the energy of the veins. However, the most important thing now is to build a network. Can you do it with psionic power?" Psionic network. The High Priestess had a very terrifying ability, which was to connect matter and psionic power together to form a super network with her as the core. She used this ability to kill the Queen of Spiders. Soren was now preparing to give her some high-level access to the tower and use her psionic energy to upgrade the control system of the arcane tower. To use a simple analogy, the current arcane system was a two-dimensional control system, but if the High Priest completed the mental network, it would be a three-dimensional control system. Yes. However, with my current power, my power. The High Priestess glanced at Soren and wisely didn't continue to speak. "I know." Soren nodded and said, "But I am not sure if I can completely remove the curse of the Queen of Spiders. Her crafty approach is too powerful. If I forcefully remove it, I may alarm her and cause some accidents. You still need to be patient. When I reach intermediate divine power, I can easily remove the curse on you." Soren lied. In fact, he already had a way to remove the curse of the Queen of Spiders, but the price was a little higher. He needed to buy some time. Because the High Priestess was still too powerful. A psionic warlock with a profession level of 30, Soren was not sure if he could defeat her without leveling up. If he removed the curse now, the two of them would be evenly matched in terms of strength. Soren needed to use a lot of divine power, including a certain amount of divinity. After removing the curse, the High Priestess' power would be greatly increased. It was very likely that she would directly become a demigod. Because of this, Soren had to make sure that he was stronger. There was no trust or distrust. Soren needed to have everything under his control. He would not do such a risky thing, even if it was a 1 in 10,000 chance. Solon also did not want to take the risk of becoming the host. Now was the time of the Avatar crisis. Anything could happen. The gods were also more fragile than ever. Soren had to think more. The High Priestess nodded. She was not very clear about the divine realm, but as long as there was hope to remove the curse, it was good. The Queen of Spiders was a veteran, great divine power. Crafty approach was a very special power. Sometimes, ordinary gods could not do anything about it. Rumble. There was a slight vibration. The flat land floating in mid-air outside the arcane tower moved. Gloria and the Fallen Witch worked together to activate a large floating ring. The whole land slowly drifted towards them. Floating movement. This was the most basic ability. The top floating city in the Arcane Empire could even complete plane teleportation. The whole city could directly teleport to the astral world. Of course. This required a huge energy shield. At that time, the floating city was almost equivalent to an independent half-plane. Begin energy transmission establishment. Mother. You are responsible for repairing the magic lock. Gloria's voice appeared in everyone's mind. Soren activated all the authority, but when the magic lock was connected to the arcane tower and the energy of the half-plane was activated, a special function was triggered. Phase shift. Soren's expression was a little shocked, and then murmured, "No. Is this a plane shift?" The control center of the arcane tower. An eye-catching spatial waymark appeared in his mind. He was familiar with this location. Because the spatial waymark was locked onto the city of Mordor, and it was a place that Soren remembered. Back to the second half of last year. Shortly after Soren arrived at the city of Mordor to build the city, he explored the nearby land. Near a land occupied by mutant plants in the city of Mordor, Soren found an ancient ruin that had been destroyed. This ruin looked a bit like the ruins of a tower, and the corresponding coordinates were the arcane tower and the shadow plane. Soren later sent people to explore there. But in fact, there was almost nothing special there, and it had been destroyed long ago. Later, the city of Mordor was expanded, and the place was also flattened. There was almost no big discovery, and it had been included in the next step of the City Hall plan. But now in front of Soren's eyes, there was a teleportation waymark. The spatial waymark was connected to the magic lock, and the half-plane of war chess was like a grafted bridge, ultimately connecting to the entire arcane tower. It seems to be able to teleport. Soren murmured at this time, the coordinates are northwest of the city of Mordor, and the spatial waymark is very stable. This wizard tower can teleport to the material plane. Right next to the city of Mordor. Teleportation requires a lot of energy. Soren's words made both Gloria and Fallen Witch pause for a moment, and then the two legendary witches immediately rushed over excitedly. The wizard tower. What Mordor lacked now was a tower to deter the enemy. If this arcane tower could be transferred to the material plane, and it was near the city of Mordor, then it could be included in Soren's current plan. The wizard tower could be the energy core of the entire island of Mordor. Even the defense system of the Temple of Mordor could be connected to the arcane tower. The most important point was that the arcane tower and the magic lock were connected. If the arcane tower could be transferred to the material plane, then the magic lock covered by this spatial waymark could also be transferred to the material plane. Magic lock. So far, there were only two forces in the material plane that had magic locks. One was the Northern Witch Council, and the other was the Wizard Alliance. If they could have a magic lock, the defense of Mordor would be directly improved by a lot. Teleportation must be in the air. This requires my mother and I to complete the large floating ring and place it under the arcane tower. After the floating ring, only then can we teleport to Mordor and the material plane through the half-bit wall. Teleportation could only be in the air. According to the information displayed by the arcane tower, this kind of teleportation could not have any connection with the Earth. Only after the tower was raised could they start the teleportation energy. How long will it take to transform this arcane tower into a floating space tower? Soren had always been decisive and immediately said, the manpower and material resources of Mordor can be allocated by you. If you need anything else, I can find a way. The arcane tower was not completed. Looking at the floating ring below, it was obvious that only 2/3 of it was completed. Mithril. The material of the floating ring needs mithril infiltration. Mordor does not have any mithril reserves. A lot of gems and materials are needed to complete the arcane tower. These can be obtained through the Witch Council, but the price may be as high as 1,000,000 Kindler. Gloria calculated quickly and immediately said, "There is no problem in terms of manpower. If there are enough materials, we can complete the transformation in half a month. We need at least 1 pound of mithril. And more than 1,000,000 Kindler funds." Mithril. Soren could not help but frown when he heard that. Kindler was not a problem. He also secretly controlled Treasure Island and worked closely with the Church of Riches. But mithril was really rare, and it was almost impossible to see in the surface world. If you want to get it, you can only go to the Underdark. And 1 pound of mithril was already a very scary amount. This kind of reserve was probably only available in the larger cities in the Underdark, but it was basically impossible for these forces to sell such expensive and rare materials. If they did, the price would be very, very scary. P.S. It's the end of the month, looking for next month's votes. Why does Fu Tu write very smoothly and quickly every time he writes a plot without integrity? Does this mean that Fu Tu is a very pure person? Chapter 800. Mithril? As if thinking of something, Soren immediately took out a piece of silver-white metal from his extra-dimensional space. This was a trophy he once obtained from the laboratory of a demigod lich. Mithril was a very high-end alchemy material, and many legendary spellcasters would have a little of it. However, this amount was generally not a lot. The piece in Soren's hand was not small, but in fact, it may be less than 100 grams. To describe mithril in one sentence, it was as light as a feather and as hard as steel. In the Underdark, even the price of diamonds was far less than mithril. Do you think this will be enough for a while? Soren handed the mithril in his hand to Gloria in front of him and said slowly, "I can get the rest done right away. Give me about 3 days." Gloria reached out and took the mithril, and immediately said, "This is enough for us to use for a week. There are also some leftover materials in the arcane tower. There is no problem in completing the large floating ring at the bottom first. But if we want to make a real floating space tower, then we must build a medium-sized energy barrier." The floating island was not a success when it flew. An arcane floating island had many supporting facilities, including long-range weapons, melee defense puppets, and energy protection systems. Once the floating island flew, the wind was particularly strong. Not to mention anything else, just the strong wind at high altitude, without the protection of an energy shield, your hairstyle for the day would basically be finished. So in order to protect your hairstyle, the floating island needed at least a wind barrier. An energy protection barrier. The city of Mordor already had the corresponding technology. The energy shield over the city was an example, but it mobilized the power of the Great Temple. Now they just needed to transfer the energy supply to the elemental furnace. Okay. I'll leave now. Soren had always pursued efficiency. After explaining the rest of the things, he immediately opened a portal to the mainland. If he wanted to get mithril, he could only go to the Underdark. However, the Underdark was not a place that was easy to enter. Soren did not dare to provoke the drows for the time being because the Queen of Spiders had come down. If he were to encounter her, he would be unlucky. Therefore, Soren's target was the Duergar in the Underdark. During his last exploration, he had already discovered a city controlled by the Duergar. There was a mithril or vein underneath the city. Judging by the time, the divine artifact level mithril chainmail should be completed soon. Soren wanted to see if he could steal it. As for facing them head-on, it was impossible. No matter how strong a saint was, there was a limit. If he was surrounded by a group of dwarven mages, he would definitely be exhausted to death. Meanwhile, on the 3rd floor of the bottomless abyss, the Golumba arena, which had been silent for a long time, suddenly began to move. During this period of time, although the Golumba arena had a new demon lord, the outside world did not know much about it, and there were not many changes. That was to say, there were more neutral demons nearby than before. Galumba Arena had expanded its business to many places in the Forgotten Land, on the third floor of the bottomless abyss. Even the two secondary demon lords spent money to hire demonic mercenaries from Galumba Arena during the Civil War some time ago. Now that the bloody war was almost over, many demonic mercenaries began to accept other orders. This time, the Galumba Arena made a big move. Not only the beheader, Sauron's personal guards were dispatched, but even the nearby demonic mercenaries also followed suit. Sauron's target was a secondary soul demon lord. In the second wave of the Avatar crisis, many secondary demon lords carried out tentative attacks on the material plane, but the strength they invested was different. The secondary demon lord that Sauron attacked this time was the one who teleported a large number of his army to the material plane during the second wave of the Avatar crisis. This secondary demon lord's luck was not good. He teleported to the vicinity of the elf forest. Although he obtained a lot of loot, he was soon counterattacked by the elf ranger. In the end, the demon army he brought out was almost wiped out, and his avatar was also beheaded once. The territory of this demon lord was very close to the Galumba Arena, so after learning the news, Sauron made a prompt decision to summon the army to launch an attack on this soul demon lord. At this time, if he did not eliminate the opponent and take the opportunity to expand his territory, would he wait for him to recover his strength? The bottomless abyss was cruel. Since he dared to go to the material plane to plunder, he must be prepared to be destroyed by other demon lords if the plunder failed. Sir Lord. The army has been assembled. Sharon the assassin has been sent out. There will be news soon. The goblin demon warlock Tebi followed Sauron with a flattering face. He should be one of the most intelligent high-grade fighters under Sauron's command, so his status had recently risen much faster than other high-grade demons. During this time, Sauron had been recruiting men. Now, he had a powerful assassin under his command, which was more dangerous than a legendary rogue. If Sauron was not strong enough, he might not be able to suppress him at all. Okay. Very good. You go and prepare the portal. Sauron looked up at the sky and said in a deep voice, "We will launch a surprise attack when it's dark." Standing beside Sauron were two beautiful high-grade succubus. One was the lady boss of the Furnace Tavern, and the other was a newly recruited high-grade freshman succubus. It was said that this freshman succubus was very favored by the demon lord Sauron. After just one night of serving, her status had skyrocketed. She was already Sauron's right-hand man, and she was even above the succubus lady boss who had followed him earlier. Originally, this was not a big deal. But what was strange was that the succubus, who had always liked to compete for favor, did not have any infighting this time. The succubus lady boss did not have any temper in front of the new favorite of the demon lord Sauron. It seemed that she was completely willing to be under the other party. This could not help but make the other high-grade demons amazed. Many high-grade demons looked at the freshman succubus more highly because of this. As the Galumba Arena, which was inclined towards order, many succubus had gathered here recently because of the chaos in the bottomless abyss. Because the succubus queen had gone missing. The Glory sisters who led the succubus army in the bottomless abyss seemed to have fallen into an infighting. Without a strong protection, the succubus could easily become the wealth that other demon lords fought for. Therefore, many succubus in the Forgotten Land hoped to be protected in the Galumba Arena. Now, there were almost 50 to 60 succubus in the territory. The Avatar crisis was an opportunity. This opportunity was not only in the material plane, but also in the bottomless abyss. Failure to attack the material plane meant paying a painful price, and this loss in the fierce bottomless abyss meant that one would become the prey of other demon lords. Sauron had never thought of attacking the material plane from the beginning to the end. He was waiting for the arrival of the second wave of impact. At that time, there would be demon lords who would fail, and these failures would be the targets that he needed to eliminate to preserve his strength. South Coast, Nerod's Land. It was about 100 kilometers away from Port Tylon. It was originally a rich place on the south coast, but now it had turned into ruins. It belonged to the border territory of the Principality of Rossard. At present, the Principality of Rossard fell into the control of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Although she had lost the war with the pirate King Sorin, it did not mean that she was not strong enough. It was just that the legendary pirate king was too terrifying. The Avatar crisis naturally would not be lenient to the Principality of Rossard. In the second wave of impact, the Principality of Rossard also suffered heavy losses. Although the Duke of Red Dragon's wife continuously fought against the greater demons, many cities and towns in the Principality were razed to the ground. Now that the mainland was riddled with holes, the interior of the Principality of Rossard could not be pacified, and no one cared about these border areas. Just like that, Nerad was forgotten. The demons were not the culprits who brought them destruction, but the traces of the devils hidden among them were the real culprits. The cities and towns were destroyed. Although the paladins of the Scorching Heart had saved a lot of people, they weren't the protectors of the secular world. After eliminating the remaining devils, these paladins with lofty ideals were summoned back by the church. The demons had been eliminated. The devils were also nowhere to be seen for the time being. However, the damaged homes that were left behind still needed these survivors to rebuild. The paladins could protect them, but the church was unable to provide relief to the victims. The Principality of Rossard was in constant internal strife and had no energy to take care of these poor people. As a result, these survivors faced a new problem of survival in this time of shortage. They lacked food. To live, they had to eat. Only by living could there be a future. Night fell. In the darkness, two figures were approaching the seaside. "Is it here?" One of the handsome young men looked around and said slowly, "The church said that there are believers of evil gods spreading their faith nearby. These evil people must be judged." A paladin. And it was a young paladin. Whether a saint samurai was old or young wasn't just a matter of their age. It could be judged from their tone of voice. "Shoo, don't alarm the enemy, we need to observe first." Because in addition to the demon lord, Dagon, the believers of the sea goddess seemed to have been active nearby recently. The one who spoke was a middle-aged clergyman. A person who dedicated his life to the gods. This kind of person often did not marry and have children in his life. The two gradually approached the seaside. Then, they saw a bonfire, and there were many people sitting around it. They could smell the aroma of food from afar. Next to the bonfire was a beautiful woman in a priest's robe, and there were cold-faced warriors patrolling nearby. There seemed to be something lurking in the sea further away, and the smell made the clergyman feel very dangerous. Disaster has come. Our world will face the attack of the devils. Only by believing in the sea goddess can we be protected. The sea has endless treasures. Food. Wealth. Status. Your nobles don't care about your lives. Your kingdom has abandoned you. Those seemingly glorious churches don't care about you at all. They used to take your offerings, but now they're watching you starve to death. The sea goddess is merciful. She saved you from the terrible demon, Dagon. Now she even gives you food. As long as you believe in and serve her devoutly. Then the sea goddess will give you everything you want. Look at the nobles who rule you. Think about giving up your kingdom. Only the sea goddess accepted you. A burst of rhythmic voices came, and some of the refugees around the bonfire fell into deep thought, but more of them stared at the big pot in front of them. Kelp, fresh fish, and a lot of fish were simmering in it for a long time. The long-term hunger made the refugees have no energy to think so much. If it were not for the fear of the patrolling warriors, they would have started to fight for it. The preaching continued. The priest in a robe in the center kept talking about how the nobles, churches, and kingdoms were despicable and shameless. At the same time, he kept preaching the mercy and greatness of the sea goddess to these refugees. At the same time, he kept mentioning the name, Dagon, which made many of the refugees nearby show fear. These damn cultists. The young paladin listened for a while and was angry. It seemed that he wanted to rush out, but he was quickly stopped by the middle-aged clergyman next to him. "Don't be impulsive." The middle-aged clergyman shook his head. The young paladin seemed to listen to him. After a moment of silence, he said, "Then we should go back and report this to the church immediately." The middle-aged clergyman heard the words and looked into the distance. A large group of sallow and emaciated refugees gathered around the bonfire. Some of the surviving children were already skinny. A trace of pity appeared in his eyes, and he slowly said, "No need. The church is guarding against the demon lord, Dagon. It is not suitable to fight the sea goddess now. And, even if we defeat them, what about these refugees? Who will help them? The church is no longer able to help the refugees in the south coast." Sigh. The sea goddess seems to only want to spread her faith among these people, and not spread evil, chaos, and slaughter like Dagon. At present, the most important thing for the church is to eliminate the demonized cultists. These refugees are taken in by the sea goddess. At least they won't starve to death. In the future, if there is a demon attack, the sea goddess will also protect these poor mortals. This is better than them starving to death. The young paladin was stunned. He felt that what the clergyman said was very reasonable, but it seemed to be a bit contrary to the doctrine because the sea goddess was an evil god. For the first time, reality, ideals, and beliefs clashed violently. The young paladin did not know whether the elder he had always respected was right or not, so he felt very confused at the moment. The education he received in the past was being impacted by reality, and for the first time, he knew about compromise. Compromise with evil for justice. He was now very confused. If he could take this step, he might become an old paladin and become the most solid force to protect justice. But if he failed, he was afraid that he would be lost in faith. In the future, it will be combined into chapters, about 400 to 500 words. P.S. Search for the official account of Buddha on WeChat. Clicking on the advertisement is equivalent to a genuine subscription. Chapter 801. Spider Forest. Returning here after such a long time, Soren saw that everything had changed. The most obvious thing was the military alert equipment. Soren not only saw many patrolling elven rangers, but also the military camp of the forest elves. After the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the drows of the Underdark and the elves of the surface world had a war. There was no clear winner between the two sides, but the hatred became stronger because of the war. The saints of the elven divine system had not yet appeared, but Soren had seen a lot of elven priests here. Most of them were priests who served the elven god, Corlan Larison. These priests had a very obvious characteristic, that was, they were very handsome, both male and female. This kind of beauty was also outstanding among the elves. The reason may be related to the hobby of the elven god, because he was a god who could be male or female. Other gods rarely used the incarnation of the opposite sex, but this elven god liked to appear in the incarnation of a woman more than once. It was said that handsome elves were more likely to get the favor of the elven god. There was bound to be a battle between the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, and the elven god, Corlan Larison. This was also the reason why the intensity of the Avatar crisis increased. The hatred of Loltha's exile was very strong. She was originally one of the most beautiful goddesses of the elves, but because of her exile, she became like a spider. At that time, the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, suffered a lot under the hands of the elven god, and this struggle of more than thousands of years made her hatred even stronger. After the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, the elven main god, Corlan Larison, immediately found a new wife. The two of them basically didn't have the slightest bit of love left between them. If possible, the Queen of Spiders would definitely not mind paying a high price to kill him, and the Avatar crisis also provided her with this opportunity. The Queen of Spiders' poisonous fangs were ready for revenge at any time. In addition to the priests of the elven god, Soren also saw a temporary small temple, which was dedicated to the current mother goddess of the elven divine system. She was the wife of Corlan Larison, the goddess of life of the elves, Angress. She was a goddess of luck. She inherited part of the power of the ancient god of life, and was in charge of the priesthood of spring, fertility, planting, birth, defense, and wisdom. Although he didn't directly possess the origin power of life, the two clergies of birth and spring contained the aura of life. The temple of this goddess was protected by power. Soren didn't want to get himself into trouble, so he didn't sneak in to investigate. Looks like the surface elves and drows are ready to fight. According to Soren's memories, the surface elves and the drows had fought more than 10 wars. Soren smelled a trace of war, and he didn't know what to do about the historical direction of this matter. There was no point in getting involved in the Elven Civil War. They had been fighting for too long, and it was impossible to ease up. He was afraid that the line of the Avatar crisis would still move forward on its original trajectory. He just didn't know if the Queen of Spiders would change because of other things. Soren went deeper and deeper. No surprise. He saw the army of the drows. Unlike the elves of the surface world, the drows' army was very well equipped. How good was it? Simply put, the regular army of the drows had a set of rare grade equipment above +3. There were many forging masters in the Underdark, and the minerals were far richer than in the surface world. If it weren't for the fact that these equipment could not withstand the sun after being enchanted, the drows' equipment and weapons would have had a crushing advantage. Zzz. A strange sound came from not far away. Soren quietly lurked over, and after taking a look, even he couldn't help but be startled. Petrifying lizard army. A dangerous magic creature with a high challenge level. Their attacks could directly turn people into stone, and they had a terrible crushing effect on middle and low-grade enemies. In addition to this natural ability, the petrifying lizards were also far superior to other creatures in hand-to-hand combat on the ground. About 2 adult petrifying lizards could fight against a ground dragon. In front of Soren were hundreds of petrifying lizards. Such strength was enough to destroy a kingdom in the surface world. A regular army of about 5,000 people could only withstand 3 rounds of attacks from the petrifying lizard knights. A round of attacks was enough to crush hundreds of people and petrify about 300 to 500 people. Basically, they would die if they were petrified. Because there was no way to remove the petrification effect on so many people, a city of drows could only raise a little more than 100 petrifying lizards at most. There were probably 3 to 5 cities of drows gathered here. Damn! Is the Queen of Spiders going to fight against the surface elves? Soren frowned and looked at them. He didn't know what was going on in his mind, but his expression didn't look very good. The entire surface world. Almost no cavalry could fight against the petrifying lizard army. The heavy cavalry was just food in front of them. Even the unicorns could barely fight against them. This was just what Soren saw so far. The army of drows already had more than 5,000 people, including the slave army, Durgars, bugbears, taurens, about 3,000 people, and the petrifying lizard army about 300 to 500 people. If such a force entered the ground battle, the city of Mordor would not be able to stop it. It's a pity that, Dark Maiden, has fallen. As if thinking of something, a trace of regret appeared on Soren's face. If the goddess had not fallen, maybe he could have used other ways to divide the power of the Queen of Spiders. This was just the tip of the iceberg in the Underdark. After the Queen of Spiders killed the other gods, she had completely unified the drows. If measured by a race, the army she could summon was definitely more than this. It seems that I can only fight with high-end combat power. Soren quickly adjusted his mood and had a clearer direction in his heart. Since there was no way for him to match up to these old great divine powers in terms of military strength, he could only take the high-end route. Golem Army. Super Magic Pulse Cannon. Space Strike. Teleportation Strike. As long as he could build up the alchemy technology tree, he would not be at a disadvantage even if he faced the Queen of Spiders in the future. After passing through the barracks, it was much quieter. At present, the surface elves and the drows were in a stalemate. The other side was fighting at the entrance and testing each other, but the large-scale battle had not yet broken out. The Queen of Spiders was probably still gathering forces, and the elven gods were also preparing for a counterattack. It's a pity that the Durgars are too weak. Looking at the entire Underdark, only the Durgars, Mind Flayers, and Beholders had the ability to contain the drows. There were too few Beholders and Mind Flayers. Even if they were strong individually, it was useless. Although there were a lot of Durgars, they had already been destroyed. They had been abandoned by the original dwarven gods, and without the support of the gods behind them, the god of the Durgars was of no use at all. The Durgars had been suppressed by the Drows for a long time. Many cities of the Drows had Durgars as slaves. Oh! As if thinking of something, Soren's eyes suddenly lit up, and he murmured, "Stone-skinned Durgars. Stone-skinned Durgars. A branch of Durgars in the Underdark." For some reason, they were abandoned by the patron of the Durgars, Durag, and were currently holed up in the northwest corner of the Underdark. This Durgars was subdued by a group of adventurers in the Underdark during the middle and later stages of the Avatar crisis. Finally, it became the most prosperous weapon black market in the Underdark and a trade point connecting the surface world. At first, the belief of the stone-skinned Durgars was the god of spiritual energy. Later, for some reason, they changed their belief to the patron of the Durgars, and then for some reason, they changed their belief to the god of spiritual energy. The price of these Durgars changing their belief was that they were abandoned, and their tribe had weakened to less than 1,000 people. Mordor City. Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. If he hadn't come to the Underdark this time, he probably wouldn't have remembered this group of Durgars. But today, since he remembered them, maybe he should consider taking them away. The Durgars were all experts in forging. And because of the Mind Flayer's enslavement, many Durgars had awakened their psionic talents, and the ability of the High Priest could definitely deter them. In this way, the arsenal of Mordor City could be formed at once. Durgars were a stubborn race. The other Durgars in the Underdark were almost impossible to subdue and recruit. Soren didn't dare to directly fight the patron of the Durgars, so the stone-skinned Durgars might be the only force he could win over at present. The Durgars didn't need much at all. For Mordor City, their biggest use was forging. Too many people would easily affect the balance of Mordor City. More importantly, there was one more thing. Mordor City would have a huge demand for forging in the future. After all, it was not a long-term solution to rely on the power of the Northern Witch Council. Soren needed to cultivate a group of excellent blacksmiths by himself. The establishment of the floating island also required a lot of metal ingots. Let's steal the mithril from Greybeard first, and then find the stone-skinned Durgar's nest. Soren was now a god, and his speed was very fast. As long as he could determine the approximate location, he could find these Durgars in a day at most. Mordor City already had a stable energy supply. He only needed to establish a teleportation beacon, and he could find a way to bring these Durgars back. However, the Durgars were very stubborn. If there was no other way, he was afraid that he could only solve the problem by violent means. Soon, Soren arrived at the place where they had fought. So much time had passed in a blink of an eye. He still remembered the danger of the battle with the demigod vampire, and he even remembered the scene of the top professions killing the Queen of Spiders. It could be said that even the current Soren would find it difficult to face that level of assassination. Sigil City. It seems that the Lady of Pain is ready to open this dusty city. A solid city appeared in Soren's sight in the distance. He had reached his goal. Thinking about the Sigil City in his mind, Soren quickly disappeared. About 10 minutes later, a rather burly Durgars came out of an alley in the city. Changed form, Shard of Divinity. P.S. There is a red packet lucky draw on the 10th. You can try your luck. Search for the official account of Buddha on WeChat. Clicking on the advertisement is equivalent to a genuine subscription. Chapter 802. Gleck City. This city wasn't very famous in the Underdark. Compared to this rather majestic city of the Grey Dwarves, perhaps the people of the Underdark were more familiar with its lord. Greybeard. This was an outstanding character that was rarely seen in 100 years. There would always be some heroes in every race, such as Eugene of the Orcs, Chway of the Drows, the Griffin King of the Humans, and so on. Greybeard was such a character. He was born in the wilderness. It was said that his father and mother were slaves controlled by the Mind Flayer Elder. He had been tortured and controlled by the Mind Flayer Elder as an experiment in his childhood. This torture changed his mind. While giving him great pain, it also allowed him to advance into a powerful psionic warlock. Perhaps it was a little sad. The fate of the Grey Dwarves had always been difficult. They were enslaved for a long time. Although they resisted and defeated the Mind Flayer in the end, this tragic history still brought a lot of pain to their race. Many of the Grey Dwarves' minds had been completely distorted in this way, so there were often some evil lunatics in this race. Greybeard was such a product. However, his talent was amazing. This painful experience finally achieved everything for him. Greybeard endured for a long time under the control of the Mind Flayer until he was strong enough. He freed the enslaved Grey Dwarves and led them to fight a powerful Mind Flayer lair head-on. Greybeard became famous in this battle. Not only did he destroy the evil Mind Flayer lair, but he also succeeded in killing the Mind Flayer elder. Of course. The price was also very heavy. Greybeard's mind was damaged. His mind occasionally fell into a terrible state of madness. There were 2 permanent scars on the back of his head, which were caused by the tentacles controlled by the Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer elder tried to suck Greybeard's brain, but before it succeeded, Greybeard suddenly went berserk and directly split its skull open with a battle axe. Since then, there was one more legendary Grey Dwarf psionic warlock in the Underdark. Greybeard was not only a legendary psionic warlock, profession level 21, but also a level 5 berserker and level 5 wizard. No one knew what kind of ability the Mind Flayer's torture brought to him, but there was no doubt that he would be a very dangerous enemy. Gleck City. This majestic city of Grey Dwarves was dug out directly from the ground. There weren't many people here, only around 10 to 20,000, but there were also many slaves of other races. This was the tradition of the Underdark. Every city in the Underdark liked to capture slaves. To them, slaves were free labor and consumables. The Durgar city was a bit of a mess. This was similar to other dwarves, because dwarves liked drinking, liveliness, and fighting. As long as no one died, no one would care if they were beaten black and blue in the tavern. Most of the dwarves had rough skin and thick flesh, so fighting was not a big deal at all. Soren had just passed by a tavern when he saw a drunk Grey Dwarf being thrown out. The resources of the Underdark were quite abundant, and the Grey Dwarves were living quite comfortably by relying on the weapons trade. Soren also knew that Gleck City was actually very rich. The reason was simple. There was a mithril vein here. Thinking of this, Soren couldn't help but look up at the castle in the distance. There was a furnace erected there, and a dazzling fire could be seen from afar. The fire here hadn't been extinguished for more than 10 years. About 10 years ago, the Grey Dwarves of this city discovered a large vein of mithril while they were in the process of mining. This was quite a shocking amount of wealth, and if it was leaked out, it might even lead to a crazy attack from the drows. Therefore, the ruler of Gleck City, Greybeard, blocked the news for a while and restricted all the dwarven craftsmen who knew the truth, not allowing them to leave. Since then, the fire in Gleck City had never been extinguished. Greybeard was using the mithril to forge a powerful equipment. A mithril mail armor of the divine level. The production of mithril had always been very low, and refining it was also quite difficult. Even if Greybeard controlled a mithril vein, he had only recently completed the creation of this equipment. Note, the mithril mail armor worn by Frodo in The Lord of the Rings is almost equivalent to the reserves of the Dwarven Kingdom for hundreds of years. Greybeard's ambition was still very big. As a spellcaster and a berserker, he had always wanted to be able to exert his most powerful strength. However, this situation was very difficult to achieve under normal circumstances. This was because if he cast spells, he couldn't wear armor, and if he wore armor, there was a very high failure rate. The failure rate of plate armor was 80 to 90%, the failure rate of half armor was 60 to 70%, the failure rate of chain armor was 40 to 50%, and even the failure rate of leather armor was 20 to 30%. Once the spell failed, he would directly suffer the backlash of the spell, which could be understood as the damage of the spell being transferred to himself. Therefore, almost no spellcasters would cast spells with armor, and because of this, Soren didn't even wear leather armor. This was a congenital defect. Greybeard was facing the same problem as Soren. No matter what, he couldn't exert his most powerful strength. If he wanted to cast spells, he couldn't wear armor, and if he wanted to fight in close combat, he had to rely on strong equipment. For this reason, Greybeard spent a lot of energy to solve the problem. He defeated the Mind Flayer's nest, obtained the knowledge of an ancient empire, and finally found a little bit of direction. The Mind Flayer Empire. An ancient galactic empire that had been destroyed. The Mind Flayers had also created a glorious psionic civilization. They were born with psionic energy, called psionic energy, during the Mind Flayer Empire, and established an interstellar empire that spanned many planes of the Sea of Stars. This empire might be more advanced than the Githyanki civilization, and the age of thorium hadn't even begun yet. The evil nature of the Mind Flayers brought them destruction. This ancient empire didn't leave many clues and disappeared in the Sea of Stars. It was said that the destruction of this empire was related to an astral beast that could never be killed. Even the materials needed to seize the divine power of the goddess of magic during the age of thorium were also related to this astral beast. The Mind Flayers went into decline. Now, the Mind Flayers in many planes had almost degenerated to a primitive race. They only relied on their natural psionic energy to fight, and their research on knowledge had long reached a bottleneck. That was how Greybeard got a little knowledge from the Mind Flayer's nest, some very ancient psionic knowledge. He was going to use psionic energy to enchant the mithril mail armor and completely eliminate its interference in the spellcasting process. According to the original history, he succeeded in the end. And the time was now. The entire Glake City's defense was very tight. Greybeard had been preparing for this for more than 10 years. Now that the divine artifact was about to be completed, he would be even more cautious. Soren, disguised as the Grey Dwarf, had not yet approached, but he had already alerted the guards. However, he pretended to be passing by and walked directly near the mayor's mansion. The security in this area was quite tight. Soren found at least a dozen patrols with his god-level perception. This didn't include the enemies lurking in the dark. In the place where the fire of the furnace lit up, Soren could perceive a trace of psionic energy fluctuations, and it seemed that there were magic traps inside. This is a bit tricky. Soren felt a slight headache at this time, but he quickly thought of a solution. He planned to level up first. As he became stronger, Soren needed more slaughter EXP to level up his profession. At his current level, relying on his profession's level alone could not increase his combat power too much. All of his abilities were almost comprehensive, and the combat power of the god-level template was more important. This was a watershed. Only when Soren's profession level reached level 30, or even level 40, would he clearly feel that the power of his profession level was gradually catching up with the power given by the god-level template. Soren currently had nearly 2,300,000 slaughter EXP. This amount of slaughter EXP was only enough for him to level up his Arcanist profession by 1 level, but it was enough for him to level up his rogue profession by 2 levels. The slaughter EXP needed to level up the rogue profession was much less. A row of data appeared in front of his eyes. Rogue profession has leveled up to level 9. Received 45, DX 36 plus, INT 27 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 15, profession HP 6 plus, Con 27 to 10, *0. 5. You have received 1 ability point. Rogue profession has leveled up to level 10. Received 45, DX 36 plus, INT 27 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 15, profession HP 6 plus, Con 27 to 10, *0. 5. You have received 1 free attribute point. Without a doubt. Soren added the free attribute point to dexterity, and now his dexterity had reached 37 points. As for the ability point, Soren did not have much to think about, and directly chose the passive ability, Legendary Reflex. Legendary Reflex, epic ability. You have an unimaginable reflex ability. This ability allows you to receive an additional 4 points of reflex when facing any attack, whether it's a magic attack or a physical attack. This ability can be stacked with any reflex ability, automatically replacing the effect of lightning reflex. Any evasion ability will receive an additional bonus. It's finally done. After receiving this legendary ability, Soren couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Legendary evasion, legendary reflex, legendary combat skills, epic dexterity, reflex evasion proficiency, intuitive evasion proficiency, roll evasion proficiency, agile movement. Except for the most difficult, Sixth Sense, Soren had almost maxed out all the passive evasion abilities. Only Sixth Sense is left. Soren looked at his attribute page and could not help but shake his head and sigh. If all the evasion abilities of a rogue were used up, then the evasion value would be stacked to more than 95%. Of course. To reach such a high level, one would need the Sixth Sense ability or the Super Sixth Sense ability. Soren couldn't do it yet. If all the evasion abilities were calculated, his current evasion value should be around 75 to 85%, and his powerful dexterity provided an additional evasion bonus. If he completed the Sixth Sense ability, then his evasion value would almost certainly reach more than 95%. Basically, physical attacks would not be a problem for him to dodge to this extent, and he could even dodge magic attacks. Sixth Sense. How can a rogue get the Sixth Sense ability? There's no way to train this thing at all. Soren looked at his ability and then focused on other aspects. For now, Soren's evasion ability should be the best in the material plane, and there shouldn't be many people in the multiverse who could have a higher evasion ability than him. It was too difficult to stack to the limit, so he didn't need to put too much effort into it for the time being. Because combat power was not only reflected in evasion. Sneak is currently at 415 points. Soren quickly focused on his own sneak. The purpose of his trip was to steal things, not to fight, so he did not hesitate to put all his skill points into sneak. At his current level, it was very difficult to improve his basic skills by himself. Currently, he could only use skill points to improve it. As if reaching a critical point, when Soren's sneak increased to 500 points, the space around him seemed to distort slightly, and then return to normal. The power of shadow. When sneak broke through the critical line of 500 points, Soren's whole body seemed to have disappeared. No. He didn't disappear, and he didn't even enter sneak. Soren was still standing in the same place, and the others could see him with their naked eyes. But unlike before, Soren could be seen, but he couldn't be felt. All his aura disappeared. There was almost no way to feel his existence in any way. 500 points of sneak had reached an incredible level, and even the gods would find it difficult to detect Soren's existence. Finally, a basic skill has increased to 500 points. Soren sighed softly, and then disappeared. There was no trace of him, and no change could be felt, as if he didn't exist at all. 500 points of basic skills was a watershed. Any basic skill that reached this level was equivalent to stepping into the realm of gods. Looking at the entire multiverse, only some of the old gods could reach this level. Even if a mortal was a legendary figure, the limit they could reach was only 400 points. Soren had completely disappeared. No one could detect his existence, and even the Lord of Shadows would find it difficult to detect Soren's sneak. He passed through the guard's protection as if he was invisible. Soren quickly approached the location of the furnace. All the guards were just decorations to him, and the only thing he needed to be careful of now was the spell traps. P.S. Search for the official account of Buddha on WeChat. Clicking on the advertisement is equivalent to subscribing to it. Chapter 803. After 500 points of basic skills, it was the other extreme. Soren directly sneaked into Greybeard's mansion. Even if he walked directly under the guard's eyes, the guard didn't notice him at all. The furnace fire was still lit, and Soren was not in a hurry to go there. The artifact must be the most important thing, and Greybeard must be watching it personally. The main purpose of Soren's trip was to get the mithril. Even if he couldn't get the artifact this time, he could still find a way to take it from Greybeard's hands in the future. After all, according to the original historical progress, Greybeard finally died in the hands of the Mind Flayer, and then this artifact became an ownerless object, attracting the adventurers of the entire Underdark to compete for it. Soren entered the mansion. He could feel that there was a faint fluctuation of psionic power in the entire mansion, which should be some kind of magic maintenance. Soren didn't dare to be too careless, and he carefully blessed himself with light body to move forward. He was looking for the treasure house. Greybeard was one of the rich lords in the Underdark, because he defeated the Mind Flayer's nest and gained a lot of wealth from it. Then he was also a blacksmith master in the Underdark. The accumulation of hundreds of years was no joke. This guy was richer than many of the kings of the surface world. More importantly, he was very good at exploring veins. Greybeard not only found mithril veins, but also fine gold veins, but this vein was 70 or 80 years ago. Greybeard relied on this to get so much money to build Gleck City. They were similar in this regard. Without the money from Treasure Island, Soren was afraid that it would be difficult to build Mordor City so quickly. Greybeard's mansion was very big. Soren walked around a little and didn't find anything, but this was not enough to stump a god, not to mention that Soren was also a part-time wizard. That's him. Soren quickly determined a target, that was the servant in Greybeard's mansion. This was already close to the inner mansion. Obviously, the servant was more trusted by Greybeard, so he could work in such a place. It was easy to deal with someone. Soren's figure crept closer and cast a spell in an instant. Mind control. Divine power conversion. Soren's figure gradually appeared, and the eyes of the Grey Dwarf servant standing in front of him suddenly became blank. His pupils became hollow, and his mind was instantly controlled by the spell. His thoughts were completely controlled by Soren's power. For a long time, Soren had been raising his two resistances. One was charm magic, and the other was control magic. The reason was very simple. This type of spell was too terrifying. Just like now, the servant under Soren's control answered all of his questions without hesitation. Even if Soren asked him to kill the others, he wouldn't have any problems. This type of spell was extremely terrifying. As long as one was immune to it, they would be doomed. Where is Greybeard now? Soren used a spell to seal the sound around him and said in a deep voice, "Tell me everything you know." The Grey Dwarf servant's expression was blank, and he slowly said, "Master should be in the furnace now. He stays there for half a day every day. He only comes back at dinner time, and then he goes back the next morning." Sure enough, Greybeard was not here. Soren thought for a moment and then asked, "Where is Greybeard's treasure vault? Where is the mithril stored in Gleck City?" The Grey Dwarf servant seemed to think for a moment, and then he said with a blank expression, "Master's treasure vault is in the basement in the southwest. He goes there once a week, and then he doesn't allow anyone to follow him. I don't know about the mithril. But all the mithril mined in Gleck City is controlled by Greybeard. It may also be stored in the treasure vault. Basement?" Soren thought for a moment, then asked a few more questions, and then dealt with the Grey Dwarf servant in front of him. There was nothing he could do about it. After all, spells were not omnipotent. He could control the Grey Dwarf servant in front of him, but he could not erase his memory of being controlled. It might work in the form of a deity, but there was no way to do it in the form of a saint. In this case, he could only deal with him. There was not much time left for Soren. If the Grey Dwarf servant suddenly disappeared, it would definitely attract the attention of others. After Soren determined the general direction, he immediately rushed there. Soren decided to take the mithril first, and then consider the artifact. Because he still did not know whether the artifact was completely completed at the moment. If it was not completed, it would be meaningless to take it. Whether it was Gloria or the fallen witch, it would be difficult for them to complete this artifact. However, the High Priestess might be able to do it because she was a psionic warlock. The southwest side of Greybeard's mansion was even more heavily guarded, but it was not a problem for Soren at all. The only trouble was that he found some traces of Grey Dwarf wizards and psionic warlocks. These people were still not to be disturbed. If he attacked them head-on, It was unlikely that a team of high-grade legendary adventurers would be able to take down this fortress. Remove the trap. A clever and fatal trap was easily seen through by Soren, and then he removed it with his divine power. The comprehensive ability of the rogue clergy was very strong, and Soren was now not limited to removing traps by himself. It could be seen that Greybeard was still very cautious, because after the trap was removed, Soren found a trigger alarm and an inactive, Finger of Death, scroll. But this was just the beginning. After Soren found the location of the basement, he found 3 fatal traps in a row. They were Disintegrate, Finger of Death, and Cloud of Death. Soren did not hesitate to take these magic scrolls. Greybeard was also quite willing to spend money. Just these 3 death magic scrolls were worth thousands of Kindler coins. Click. The basement was quickly opened. In order to prevent the sound of the opening from disturbing others, Soren cast a 10-feet silence spell. No sound could be heard. This was a little trick of a top-notch thief. Back then, Soren would always carry some silencing spells with him. Sometimes, he would use them to deal with wizards chanting spells. Other times, he would use them to activate mechanisms to prevent others from being alarmed. However, this kind of ability was useless against enemies who had mastered the ability Silence Spell. Rumble. The sound of the mechanism opening was still very loud. If there was no silence spell, many guards would have been alerted. Soren quietly sneaked in. There was a crystal light underground, and the passage was dark. As soon as Soren entered, he noticed something. Gargoyle? Soren frowned, and the next moment, he disappeared from where he was. Shadow Leap. Click. With a silver-white cold light, an obsidian statue was cut in half by him. Alchemy Puppet. Alchemy methods other than golem crafting were not as effective as puppet golems. They could only be used to guard specific places. The Grey Dwarves had many similar alchemy methods. Next was a bunch of traps that needed to be removed. Greybeard had set up a large number of trigger traps in this basement. With Soren's ability, it took him more than 10 minutes to remove them. For other legendary rogues, it was impossible for them to do it without an hour or 2. Rumble. After removing all the trigger traps, Soren opened the first door. The sound was still very loud. In this era, it was difficult to avoid making noise when opening mechanisms, but Soren had prepared a lot of spells, so he didn't have to worry about alarming others. Golden Light. As soon as Soren opened Greybeard's treasury, he immediately felt like he was blinded by the golden light. Damn! This guy is actually so rich. Greybeard was very rich because he was a blacksmith master in the Underdark and had been in the arms trade for hundreds of years. The Grey Dwarves basically lived for more than 300 years, and the wealth they accumulated in 100 years was far more than the human race's nobles. The first thing Soren saw when he opened it was a gold mountain. His initial estimate was that Kindler alone had more than 1 million pieces. This guy is really careful. There are even trigger traps inside. Greybeard's cautiousness opened Soren's eyes. He was just about to step in when he immediately found a trigger trap under a stone brick. There were a lot of things in the treasury. Gold, silver, and jewelry were only a part of it. Soren also saw a lot of weapons and equipment. However, these were all forged according to the Grey Dwarves' physique. Most of them were heavy armor and heavy weapons. The mainstream were battle axes, war hammers, heavy hammers, and so on. There were probably hundreds of sets piled up, and all of them were extraordinary level and above. Is this guy preparing to arm an elite? Soren didn't look too much. He directly activated his holy form and used his god-level perception to find the mithril. Soon, he found a secret compartment. This was a magic lock, but it was not a problem for the god of rogues. After Soren opened it, he immediately saw a dazzling silver-white light. Mithril. And there was a lot of it. In addition, there was a small amount of adamantine, and 3 legendary soul crystals. This guy has a lot of resources. Looking at this treasury, the wealth in it was much higher than in the city of Mordor. Since Soren came in, he naturally took as much as he could. First, he emptied the mithril and adamantine, and then directly cast a spell to open a dimensional rift in the air. Then, under the effect of the advanced mage's hand, the gold flowed into it like a golden river. Finally, it was the armor and weapons. It was not the first time Soren emptied someone's house. Many of Mordor's funds were moved from the goblin and demon lords. He had experience in moving. It didn't take long for Soren to empty the treasury in front of him. There was no way to calculate how much money there was. Not counting the valuable mithril, adamantine, and soul crystals, as well as the extraordinary weapons that the Grey Dwarves were equipped with, the gold, silver, and jewels in the treasury alone probably added up to 2 to 3 million gold dirhams. Of course, the Avatar crisis had broken out. Gold and silver were still okay, but jewelry was not so easy to sell, and the value would definitely be reduced. Gloria's experiment required a lot of gems, and these resources could be sold internally. Soren carefully turned around again. After confirming that there were no other secret compartments, he planned to leave here. Greybeard didn't seem to have any hobby of collecting legendary equipment. It was estimated that the legendary equipment was on him, so there were no other high-value legendary items here. Okay. It should be about time. Soren took a last look at the now empty treasury, then came to the gate and directly stepped on a stone brick that could move slightly. The next moment, the trigger warning trap was activated, and the magic fluctuations directly alarmed many people. Fly. Greater invisibility. Soren continuously cast spells to rush out of the basement, and then flew toward the location of the furnace fire without thinking. The next moment, many people rushed over from the castle, including many high-grade Grey Dwarf wizards and psionic warlocks. At the same time, in the direction of the furnace fire, there was suddenly a violent magic fluctuation, followed by a very burly Grey Dwarf rushing over. Greybeard. As a Lord-level figure in the Underdark, Greybeard's momentum was quite amazing. He was very powerful and more difficult to deal with than most of the drows. It was possible to fight with Ascendant Eugene Gang head-on. Greybeard soon arrived at the treasury in the basement. When he saw that it was empty, he almost went mad with anger. He roared so loudly that no one dared to come near. Greybeard was so angry that his beard and hair stood up. But, after all, he was still a legendary figure, and his thinking speed was also very fast. After a little pause, Greybeard's face immediately changed, and he rushed in the direction of the furnace fire like crazy. Unfortunately, everything was too late. Just as Greybeard left the basement treasury, there was suddenly a rapid alarm from the furnace fire, followed by a series of rumbling explosions. Damn thief! I'm going to tear you into pieces. Greybeard didn't dare to think about anything at this time. He ran toward the furnace fire like a madman, but by the time he arrived, it was already a mess, and there were fires everywhere. As for the divine artifact level mithril chain mail that was almost completed. As early as when he arrived at the basement treasury, it had been secretly taken away. The enemy's strength was very strong. He actually broke all the protective spells, triggered the traps, and finally took away the divine artifact of the furnace fire. Ah! Everything in front of him made Greybeard almost crazy. His eyes were blood red, and he directly grabbed a guard and tore him in half. Find it. Find it. Seal the city gate. Find it for me even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground. An angry roar echoed. However, at this time, Soren had already left Gleck City. He was slightly injured at the last moment, but the price was definitely worth it. P.S. Today, there is a red packet lottery on the WeChat public account. There are about 1,000 red packets. You can try your luck. Chapter 804. Phew. I didn't expect Greybeard to be so ruthless. Even the confinement spell was turned into a spell trap. If it weren't for the protection of the divine power, I'm afraid I would have died. As if recalling the situation just now, Soren couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Imprisonment was not maze. The latter could still find a way out, but it couldn't trap Soren at all. However, imprisonment was already a quasi-legendary spell. Ordinary legendary adventurers could accidentally seal it directly. Without freedom, they might be trapped for a lifetime. Even if he was accidentally sealed, it would be very troublesome. After breaking the seal, he would have to face the siege of Greybeard. Imprisonment was a powerful spell. It could directly seal legendary creatures deep underground. In general, because the casting time was too long, this spell was rarely used in actual combat. The most common use of imprisonment was to seal. There were many evil creatures sealed deep underground in the eastern countries, and most of them were trapped by imprisonment. However, the imprisonment in the eastern countries was slightly different, especially the ancient evil creatures. Sometimes it required a huge price to pay. The Baylor that destroyed a dwarf city some time ago was a high-level demon sealed by a confinement spell in a certain era. He did not know how the dwarves broke the seal and released this demon at once. Theoretically speaking, imprisonment was possible to seal a true god. However, if a true god mastered the power of space change, then they could ignore this spell. Soren snatched the divine mail armor for only a moment, but the degree of danger was quite amazing. If it wasn't for divine shield, he might have directly entered a state of near death because Greybeard put a lot of trigger traps on it. Finally got it. Soren looked at the chainmail in his hand that was flowing with silver white light, and there was a satisfied smile on his face. Greater restoration, divine power conversion. As a true god, Soren could now resist, heal, and cast spells. Although the injury was more serious, as long as he didn't die, he could use magic to recover. Back then, when the adventurers besieged the true gods, it was very difficult to kill them without using up all their divine power points. The divine armor chain mail was not completely completed. However, Soren had only obtained it a few days in advance. If this celestial artifact was completed, he was afraid that Greybeard would be the first to equip it. At that time, the only way to obtain it would be to kill him. There's no data. I can't use appraisal to determine it either. Looks like I have to bring it back and show it to the High Priest. After all, the High Priestess was a psionic warlock and had been to Sigil City. Her profession level was as high as level 30. She should have a way to complete the last part of this artifact. Soren could feel that most of the runes were completed, but the runes had yet to fuse together. If he had the time, he could also use his divine power and divinity to complete the final transformation, but it might take a little longer. Arcane knights could cast spells while wearing armor, but the gods had other methods to replace it. With the divine artifact in hand, there was no point in staying here. Soren determined the direction and immediately headed in the direction of the Grey Dwarf. The area of the Underdark was very vast. However, because of the terrain, it wasn't very convenient to travel. Some of the underground worlds were deep under the sea, so it was very difficult to survive there. The current situation of the Grey Dwarf shouldn't have changed much. This was because according to the original history, there was a group of hook horrors near their territory. These were the most common dangerous creatures in the Underdark. At this moment, Soren's strength was about to reach a critical point. The next thing he needed to consider was to advance into a legendary profession. For example, Shadow Dominator, or Great Arcanist. If Soren hadn't advanced into an Arcanist, he might have chosen to advance into a Great Wizard. This was a legendary profession that could only increase one's level by 5. However, now that he was on the path of an Arcanist, he definitely had to try to advance into the realm of a Great Arcanist. Now, his data page had become Name, Soren, Saint Form, Lesser Divine Power. Race, Half-Elf, Son of Slaughter. Attributes, Strength 22, plus 5, Frost Giant's Belt plus 4, Agility 37, plus 5, Constitution 27, plus 5, Intelligence 27, plus 6, Wisdom 20, plus 5, Charm 25, plus 9. Alignment, Lawful Evil Profession, Level 10 Rogue, 01150000, Level 10 Shadow Dancer, Max, Level 10 Wizard, 01275000, Level 7 Arcanist, 0155500, Grade 6. Health points, 532532, Robust. Experience points, 455075, Slaughter EXP, 17,545, Profession EXP, unassigned. Skill points, none attribute points, none legend level, 150 divinity points, 130, middle divinity. Requires 300 points to upgrade, greater divinity. Divinity points, 46, lesser divinity. Requires 100 points to upgrade, middle divinity. Divine power points, 213820. To upgrade to intermediate divine power, requires 600 divine power points and mastery of spatial manipulation. The current storage limit of the divinity is 820 points. Clergy, half-elf, rogue, tracker domain, slaughter, death, fear, evil, domination, piracy, shadow, flora spiritual energy, evil spiritual energy, fear spiritual energy status, normal basic skills, sneak 505, literacy 335, steal 275, picklock 265, snare 245, focus 215, negotiate 365, appraise 145, deceive 245, intimidate 375, taunt 245, perform 175, listen 315, dodge 215, parry 185, block 155, heal 185, search 355, detect 355, scroll copy 155, spell identify 185, survival 325, use magic equipment 155, cooking 115, alchemy 215, forge magic weapon 215. Saint form, divine transcendence, magic immunity 1 to 4, epic divine power. Divinity abilities, space manipulation, death's hand, reality manipulation, form manipulation, divine power shockwave, language proficiency, character proficiency, interplane communication, astral teleportation, plane teleportation. Legendary skills, legendary reflex, expose weakness, perfect dual wielding, omnipotent hands, legendary evasion, legendary battle skills, epic dexterity, epic intelligence, epic constitution. Special abilities, blessing of the goddess of magic, god slayer, blessing of the misfortune goddess, blessing of the sea goddess, dragon blood baptism LV2, heart of slaughter, slayer, death walker, ascetic, erudite, blasphemy. Personal abilities, nimble left hand, eidetic memory, perseverance, encyclopedic knowledge, skilled spellcasting, reflex evasion, intuitive evasion, roll evasion, nimble movement, evasive sight, dark vision, combat spellcasting, mobile spellcasting, spell control, empower spell, maximize spell, crafting magic equipment, spell penetration, minor magic resistance, minor cold resistance, medium fire resistance, minor poison resistance, minor electric resistance, robust, high regeneration, telepathy. 100 feet profession abilities, arcane memory, arcane counterspell, arcane runes, shadow dominator, agile mind, military weapon, proficiency, curved sword, legendary. Battle skills, summon shadow, shadow jump, 300 meters, shadow strike, shadow jump, 2 times, vampiric touch, divinity, sword form, heavy slash, sword form, horizontal slash, sword form, beheading, sword form, waist slash, sword form, spinning strike, spinning slash. Bottomless abyss. 3rd floor. Forgotten land. Along with the loud rumbling sounds, a tragic siege battle began. Sauron's figure stood at the back of the demon army. On his left and right were 2 seductive high-grade succubus. The goblin demon warlock had led the army to join the battle. They kept driving the low-grade demons like a tide, consuming the enemy's strength again and again. This was the law of the bottomless abyss. Low-level demons would always be expendable. They were cannon fodder sent to their deaths. The cruel law of survival of the fittest determined that demons who could still be promoted under such circumstances would have decent potential. This was just the first round of attack. Thousands of low-grade demons that Sauron had gathered from the Forgotten Land died. The timid demons were the most exhausted, but they were also the most numerous. These kinds of demons were everywhere in the wild, and they could easily gather up to 1,000 people. The berserk demons did not join the battle. They would be the main force of the siege, and now was not the time for them to fight. Master. A Glabrizu appeared in front of Sauron. It seemed to be eager to fight. This was a high-grade demon that had recently joined Sauron. It hoped to show its strength in this battle to gain more power and status. It was different from the other demon lords. Sauron was recognized as the most trustworthy demon lord in the Forgotten Land. This had long been recognized by the neutral demons. Meritorious deeds were rewarded. Wrong deeds were punished. In the Galumba arena, military service was the most valuable thing. Last time, a demon lord sent his subordinates to provoke them, and the goblin demon warlock fought back fiercely. That was why he could now command a demon army. Other high-grade demons also coveted this kind of power. They were eager to gain a higher status. Sauron had been accumulating strength. Now he had tens of thousands of demons under his control. Although most of them were middle-grade and low-grade demons, the number of Hezru had reached more than 300. Hezru was the advanced form of the berserk demons. Its weight was more than 2,000 pounds. They were very dangerous in a land battle. Although the battle was still in a stalemate, if Sauron sent the Hezru to the battlefield, it would only be a matter of time before the city wall fell. But Sauron also had a lot of things to consider. Many of the demon lords in the Forgotten Land knew about this attack, and he could not consume too much power in this battle. It was also because of this that the demon lords in the enemy camp fought with their lives, trying to delay Sauron and force him to retreat because he could not bear the losses. Facing the Glabrizu, Sauron thought for a moment and nodded, "Go. Bring the Vrok demons. I'll leave the berserk demons to you." The Glabrizu's face revealed a sinister and excited smile. After nodding, she led the demon army and rushed to the battlefield. Demons were very warlike. Only through battle could they grow further. The area under the city wall had become a meat grinder. No matter how many low-grade demons were thrown in, there was no sound at all. As if he felt that the time was right, Sauron waved his hand forward. Along with the dull sound of footsteps, the Berserk Demon Legion, which weighed more than 1,500 pounds, also began to advance. They would directly flatten the city gate with their extraordinary strength. Master. The succubus lady boss seemed to be in high spirits today. Under normal circumstances, succubi rarely participated in head-on battles, but at this moment, she took the initiative to ask for battle. "Let me join the battle too." Zorro was slightly startled when he heard this. Succubus's strength was not bad, but close combat was an obvious shortcoming. It was still a bit dangerous to let her join the battle. If something happened to her, Sauron would have to find a new commander and succubus to sleep with. However, succubus lady boss was not as important as Gloria and the others in his heart. He thought about it and agreed because only fighting could let her enter the realm of legends. "Master. Let me go too." At this moment, the succubus on the other side of Sauron also spoke. Her expression was quite frivolous, as if she did not care about what was happening in front of her. "Huh? What's going on today? Even succubus wants to join the battle." However, since one of them had already asked to join the battle, they should go. After all, this was the bottomless abyss, and Sauron had to give them a chance to hone themselves. Don't fight head-on. If you want to go, just go. After all, they were succubus who had slept with him. Sauron thought about it and mobilized a demonic mercenary to help them. At this time, the situation on the battlefield had been leaning toward Sauron's side. As if unable to bear the pressure, a strong pressure suddenly appeared on the city wall. The breath of a demon lord. After sensing this aura, Zorro's body trembled, and his figure disappeared on the spot. Lesser Demon Lord. The enemy's leader finally appeared. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Greater teleportation. Sauron's figure appeared directly on the city wall, accompanied by a raging fire. He roared and swung his heavy beheading sword at the lesser demon lord in front of him. The demons around all avoided him. Whether it was intermediate or greater demons, they did not dare to get close to the two people because this level of battle was not something they could intervene in. Flame whip. The raging fire turned into a long whip in Sauron's palm, and then directly wrapped around the enemy in front of him. Facing the aggressive Sauron, a trace of panic appeared in the eyes of the injured lesser demon lord in front of him, and he directly used greater teleportation to open up the distance. Want to run? Sauron's mouth showed a sarcastic smile. The greater teleportation ability of the Balrog was a talent. How could other demon lords be more proficient in teleportation than him? As long as the enemy in front of him was defeated, the territory of the Galumba arena would directly double. P.S. Search for the official account of Buddha on WeChat. Clicking on the advertisement is equivalent to a genuine subscription. Chapter 805. Wind Spear Hills. Near Shipwreck Bay, in Shui-Mu Town, a dexterous figure came in from outside the wooden wall. He ignored the guards outside and went directly into the alley behind the inn. Then he entered a hidden tavern from the back door. There were many guests in the tavern, but these were not the main point. The main point was that they were gathered around a gambling table and were gambling intently at the moment. The thug guarding the door glanced at the newcomer. After the newcomer showed his sign, the thug immediately smiled and took him to the small room behind the bar. Master Ugly Monkey. After entering the room, the newcomer immediately bowed slightly and looked up at the young man in front of him, who had a cold expression with a trace of murderous intent, and said slowly, "All the spies we sent out are missing. Shipwreck Bay is abnormal. Recently, a group of very powerful masters have emerged and are competing with us for territory. The Thieves Guild's attitude has been very strange recently. It seems that they don't intend to help us, but they also don't intend to help the other party." The young man in the room was carving patterns with a dagger. He raised his head and frowned when he heard the words, "Who did it? Haven't you found out their identity yet?" Ugly Monkey's tone sank, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly became a lot more oppressive. As a rising star in Mordor City, Ugly Monkey was now a high-grade rogue. He was only one step away from legendary. He was an elite who grew up in slaughter. His strength was also ranked in Mordor City. Not to mention, Ugly Monkey also had the blessing of Sir Soren. He could mobilize the power from the god of rogues when necessary. "I'm incompetent. But we found this on them." The newcomer suddenly knelt down, but then he took out a strange emblem and said slowly, "There seems to be a dark species among the enemy. They seem to have a vampire in the last night's attack." Ugly Monkey reached out and took it. After glancing at it, his face changed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, "Shadow Thief? Vampires? It seems that the Shadow Lord's minions have finally appeared. Send someone to invite the bishop immediately. This matter must be reported to Mordor City immediately." "Forget it. I'll go myself. You go and gather the people now. Gather the Dark Blade Guards in the City of Wealth and the assassins in Port Tylon." After saying that, Ugly Monkey put away the emblem in his hand. This matter was of great importance. It might involve the conflict between two god churches. He no longer had the authority to make the decision. He had to send the news back as soon as possible. Meanwhile, in the great temple of Mordor City, the high priest also received a spell message immediately. "The Shadow Thief has appeared." The high priest frowned slightly and said slowly, "This organization has been passed down for thousands of years. Ever since the Lord of Shadows took over the Shadow priesthood, it split up. One part of it joined the Association of Thieves, and the other part was subdued by him. No. This matter must be reported to the Lord immediately." Although the half-elf church wasn't weak, it couldn't compare to an old god's church. If he wanted to fight against the Shadow Thief Church of the Shadow Lord, he might have to rely on the secular power of Mordor City. Fortunately, the city of Mordor was run like an iron bucket. The shadow thieves did not dare to make trouble in the city of Mordor. The city of Wealth was the territory of the Lady of Wealth. Port Tylon had the Church of the Sea Goddess. Therefore, the target of the shadow thieves could only be Shipwreck Bay, the weakest part of Mordor City. This was a place where good and bad people were mixed together. They could easily disintegrate the power of Mordor City here. If the route to Shipwreck Bay was cut off, the slave trade of Mordor City would be interrupted. Although the income in this area was not enough to affect the development of Mordor City, the loss was definitely not small. The high priest got up and walked out of the temple. This matter was of great importance. It was related to the struggle between the two gods. She had to tell Gloria. If necessary, she might need to rely on the power of the Witch Council. The Underdark. Soren frowned and looked at the dead hooked horrors in front of him and the body of the Grey Dwarf next to him. He found the stone-skinned Grey Dwarf, but the first contact was not good. The Grey Dwarf was too xenophobic. After discovering Soren's identity, he actually regarded him as a human on the surface and launched an attack directly. The final result was needless to say. Although Soren shocked the enemy with killing, the beginning was not what he expected. There were 3 Grey Dwarves in front of him. Unlike the other Grey Dwarves, the situation of the stone-skinned Grey Dwarves was not very good. This could be seen from the clothes on their bodies. They lacked materials, and although the Underdark was rich in minerals, other materials were not abundant. How should I start? Soren could not help but fall into deep thought. But before he could decide whether to use force or persuasion, the High Priest's telepathic message suddenly came. Soren could not help but be startled after listening and murmured, "Have they finally shown up? The Shadow Thieves. This is a tricky old organization." Since the Shadow Lord had already offended him, it was impossible for him to hold back. Soren was waiting for him to show up. But he did not expect to find a big fish. The Shadow Thieves organization that could compete with the Thieves' Union in the dark, a grey force with a large number of rogues that had been passed down for thousands of years. High Priest. I'll go back now. Leave the Shadow Thieves to me. But I have something here that I need you to deal with. Soren thought for a moment and quickly came up with a solution. There was no doubt that dealing with the Shadow Lord was the most important thing at the moment, but he still had to take the stone-skinned Grey Dwarves back. This matter could be left to the High Priest. She was a legendary psionic warlock, and she could also mobilize Soren's divine power. With her ability to control minds, it was not very difficult to incorporate this group of Grey Dwarves. Moreover, the force of Mordor could provide her with support at any time. I'm going to set up a teleportation beacon now. You inform Gloria to complete the energy connection. If these Grey Dwarves are not willing to surrender, directly suppress them with force. He did as he said. Soren immediately began to set up a teleportation beacon on the ground. Since Mordor had enough energy, it was much easier to open the portal. Basically, it was almost catching up with the ability of the Witch Council. If these Grey Dwarves were not willing to surrender, Soren could ask Gloria to directly teleport the Golem army. If the Grey Dwarves agreed, they could still get the status of citizens in Mordor, otherwise, they could only be captured as slaves. Although Soren treated the slaves well, there were still many indigenous slaves as laborers in the main structure of Mordor. Half an hour later, Soren's figure appeared in the Great Temple. The High Priest had been waiting here for a long time. She sent up a report, and at the same time, there was a special emblem. She slowly said, "My lord. The power of the Shadow Thieves has appeared in Shipwreck Bay. And there are traces of dark creatures. The vampires in Shipwreck Bay seem to want to drive us out." Vampires? Soren frowned when he heard this, and immediately remembered what happened during the time of the vampire god. At that time, he met the vampires near Shipwreck Bay. Because it was a gray area, there was a vampire organization here, but Soren had not done anything to them. I see. Soren glanced at the information in his hand and slowly said, "Leave it to me. Your task is to subdue these grey dwarves. Mordor will need them in the future. Send someone to send a message to Arendelle immediately. This time, we must use the power of Princess Royal to deal with the Shadow Lord." "Right." Soren paused here and said slowly, "Have you found any traces of Maiden of Pain and Maiden of Winter?" Maiden of Pain, Maiden of Winter. These two gods were the evil gods who attacked Princess Royal. Soren and Princess Anna met because of an attack planned by the Maiden of Pain. "No." The high priest shook his head and said, "But we seem to have found some drows from the Underdark. They are not believers of the Queen of Spiders." Drows? Not believers of the Queen of Spiders? Now the gods of the Underdark had been greatly reduced. The god of caves had fallen, and the whereabouts of the grey dwarves were unknown. There were not many gods that the drows could believe in except for the Queen of Spiders. The Maiden of Pain was one of them. Believers of the Maiden of Pain? Soren pondered for a moment and said slowly, "Send someone to pay attention to their movements. After dealing with the Shadow Lord, it's time to deal with them." Vivian's priesthood was still unsettled. Now the little girl's divine power was stabilizing. After all, she was the most powerful child of fear. The divine power given to her by Soren was almost complete. Once the fusion of the divine power was completed, Vivian would be able to advance to a demigod. At this time, if she wanted to continue to improve, she could only rely on the power of the priesthood. Vivian couldn't get a racial priesthood like the demigod vampire, so what she needed was a compatible priesthood. Maiden of Pain, Lau Vita. The priesthoods she mastered were pain, injury, pain, torture, suffering, and torture. Although they were all similar priesthoods. But when these priesthoods were combined, most of them were related to pain, and pain, priesthoods may extend to fear. Because the world was afraid of pain and torture. According to Soren's own judgment, some of the Maiden of Pain's priesthoods could be more than 50% compatible with Vivian. In this case, Vivian's priesthood after the fusion of the divine power was also settled. As long as she had it, she could even have the foundation to fight against the Lord of Fear independently. At that time, the Dread Lord's power would be greatly weakened as he slowly devoured the Fear godhood. Then, Winter Maiden was the target that must be dealt with. Soren was now an ally with Princess Royal. If Princess Royal wanted to get the priesthood of the Goddess of Snow, Winter Maiden was a hurdle that she couldn't get around. Only by defeating Winter Maiden, Princess Royal could get the power of the God of North Wind and Snow. Similarly, if Winter Maiden wanted to advance to the mid-level divine power, she also had to kill Princess Royal. P.S. I have no inspiration when I have a cold. It seems that I really need to exercise more. Chapter 806. Eastern Route. A heavily armed battleship was sailing on the calm sea. Behind it were two frigates, and a black flag could be seen on the flagpole. There was a huge shadow near the three battleships. It looked like an ancient giant beast. Just its silhouette alone was enough to instill great fear in people's hearts. The huge shadow followed the three battleships at the bottom of the sea, and only stopped when it was close to the front of the sea. Ferocious barbs could be seen on its slightly raised back, and even the legendary champions could not help but feel weak at the sight of it. This thing was more than 100 meters long, and it was unknown how many tons it weighed. It had a big mouth full of sharp teeth and exuded an extremely dangerous aura. Sister. I didn't expect Mordor to raise such a terrible monster. No wonder they are almost invincible at sea. A pretty girl stood on the deck, looking at the huge shadow in the distance, and said slowly, "I don't know if it is right for us to join Her Excellency Gloria this time. I heard that the Witch Council is already a little dissatisfied with us." The girl did not look old. Judging from her appearance, she was about 18 or 19 years old, but you could not guess the age of the witches. They were a very special group of people. "It's okay." It was another girl who replied. She looked about 80 to 90% similar to the previous girl. At a glance, you could feel that the two were like twins. The elder sister looked much calmer. She glanced at the sea behemoth in the distance and said slowly, "The resources of the Witch Council are not enough for our next research. Although Her Excellency Eye of the North is still there, she has been there for a long time. Mordor is now a system of its own. I'm afraid her future achievements will not be lower than the Northern Council. The Witch Council is now intertwined with factions. We witches from the necromancy department have always been in an awkward position. Now that the chaos is coming, it doesn't make much sense to stay in the Witch Council. Before this trip, I have gone to see Her Excellency Eye of the North. She is quite supportive of us being apprenticed to Her Excellency Gloria." Speaking of this, the elder sister waved her hand and said, "There are magic runes on this ship. Even ordinary battleships in Mordor City have begun to enchant them. I wonder how much the legendary Spectre ship has been strengthened. I'm curious what other abilities an undead legendary battleship has." The girl who looked like a younger sister nodded and said, "Yes. I'm also quite curious." Forget it. Forget it. Anyway, the Witch Council has never liked people born in the school of necromancy. As long as Mordor City can provide us with resources, that's enough. Necromancy. This faction was considered rather special among the Magi. What was unexpected was that these two delicate-looking twin girls actually studied this rather sinister-sounding magic faction. Both sisters had their own unique traits. Apart from the Black Witch's robe, the elder sister had a black tattoo on her right earlobe, while the younger sister had a red tattoo near her collarbone. The two sisters each wore an identical pair of earrings, one on the left and one on the right. The earrings just happened to be a pair. The outline of land vaguely appeared in front of them. The speed of the battleship had obviously slowed down. At this time, a man dressed as a captain came out of the cabin. It was the pirate leader under Soren, ol. Sea Dog. He nodded to the two witches carefully and said, "Two great witches. The land is in front of us. The last time I encountered a storm, I was blown here. It's a completely new continent." A ray of magical light appeared. The elder sister had flown up at this moment. She looked at the coastline in the distance and frowned slightly. "Is it here? It seems that the energy of the ley line is a bit abnormal. Sister. I seem to feel a very strong undead energy. No wonder Lady Gloria sent us here." The younger of the two witches waved her hand and took out a strange crystal. Then, she tested it a little and said slowly, "According to Lady Gloria's latest research, the energy radiation intensity here is about the same as the outer islands. If there is no energy protection from the temple. If you live here for a long time, it may lead to signs of mutation similar to the indigenous people. Let's go. Let's go ashore first. You send people to dock the ship on the shore and let people move our things over. According to Lady Gloria's order. We need to establish a stable transmission mark here." ol. Sea Dog didn't have any temper in front of the two witches. He knew that these two new witches were the confidants of the Lady of Mordor. Nowadays, there were more and more witches in Mordor. Although they rarely dealt with other management of Mordor, these pirate leaders knew that these witches were not low in status. The last time he returned to Mordor, he received a secret mission. In order to get here, they had been sailing for a while. The battleship began to dock. The sea monster left in the shallow sea area began to patrol. It was the pet of Mordor's owner, Lord Soren. In the past, he had always been a guard at Treasure Island. It was guarding against those sea monsters attacking the fleet of Mordor, but now the sea monsters there were almost all killed by it. Nowadays, it was almost impossible for Mordor to encounter a naval battle, so it had nothing to do. Recently, it was sent out by the higher-ups of Mordor. The eastern route was very dangerous. It was possible to encounter all kinds of monsters along the way. Fortunately, it was there to protect them, so they avoided a lot of trouble. ol. Sea Dog saw it swallow a giant squid king with his own eyes. With this mutant killer whale, the sea is almost on the verge of being overrun. If they encountered the Nagas on the eastern route, they almost didn't dare to provoke this fleet at all. Mordor City. The mayor's mansion. After returning to Mordor City, Soren immediately gave the mithril to Gloria. As for the divine male armor, he was not in a hurry. He could wait until the high priest subdued the stone-skinned grey dwarf. Now that the Shadow Lord had appeared, he needed to prepare a lot of things. Princess Royal quickly sent a message, but after all, she had to stay in Arendelle. Only when Soren was in a battle, Princess Royal would directly teleport to support him. How to deal with the Shadow Lord was a problem. However, Soren was not completely helpless. There were only two most difficult things to kill this god. One was to find him. The other was to seal his ability to move in the shadow plane. As long as these two conditions could be met, Soren would have a 70% chance of killing him. Shadow Thief. Soren's brain was immersed in memories. He didn't have many memories about the Shadow Thief. Now he had to organize his memories and find out the information about the Shadow Thief. It would be best to dig out their nest. The whereabouts of the Shadow Lord were mysterious. He had been hiding from the Lady of the Night. The Shadow Thief was a worldly power under his control. If Soren could find the nest of the Shadow Thief, he might be able to locate the coordinates of the Shadow Lord with his tracking clergy. With tracking in hand, the world was his. Soren's biggest reliance now was the tracking clergy. The Shadow Lord didn't dare to fight him now because he was afraid of the power of the tracking clergy. If the stealth ability was destroyed, the Shadow Lord's strength would be reduced by half. Tap, tap, tap. Gloria's figure appeared outside the room. She glanced at Soren, who was frowning and pondering. She gently poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of him. She slowly said, "Is it about the shipwreck bay? Do you need me to divine? There should be a way to find the Shadow Thief." Soren raised his head and immediately shook his head. "No. There's no need for you to divine at all. A Shadow Thief is not a problem for me. Don't do any divination now. The Avatar crisis has messed up the clues of fate. The cost of prophecy at this time is greater than you think. Don't do it again." Gloria gently raised her hand and lifted the long hair by her ear. She nodded obediently and said, "I know." "Right. OL, Sea Dog has sent back a message. The teleportation mark has been established. There is indeed a new continent. But that continent is a bit special. The witch I sent said that the energy of the ley lines there is a bit strange." "New continent?" Soren raised his head and said slowly, "Is that so? Let them build a base first. At present, Mordor has no energy to focus on the new continent. But you can send some golems to guard it. When the things here are solved, we will send people to check it out." A new continent. The last time OL, Sea Dog came back, this matter attracted Soren's attention. However, Mordor was currently a little weak in exploring the new continent. All he could do was to send people to check it out. Things had to be done step by step. Now the limitations of the outer islands had begun to show. The expansion of Mordor was about to reach a critical point. If it went further, it might touch the interests of the Amazonian women. This was a group of difficult opponents. The warriors of the tropical Amazon jungle were much more difficult to deal with than the indigenous people. Moreover, they had the Storm Lord behind them. Soren did not intend to confront them head-on. So at present, he must make arrangements in other places. "Right." Gloria seemed to remember something and whispered, "There is news from Port Tylon. It said that the Storm Temple has been abnormal recently. It seems that several legendary Storm Lords have appeared. Traces of demons have also begun to appear on the south coast. The Naga sirens in the deep sea area have also suffered heavy losses. The Naga sirens were forced to submit to the sea goddess for help. I heard that many devil rays have appeared. It seems that there are also believers of Dagon." Dagon. This demon lord finally couldn't help but make a move on the material plane. Soren fell into deep thought. The demon lord, Dagon, was the demon of Orbis. He was the king of the deep, of the abyss. He ruled the 89th layer of the abyss, the Shadow Sea. This demon lord had always wanted to get his hands on the water space of the material plane. The conflict with the sea goddess had never stopped. Is there any trace of the son of Dagon? Soren thought for a while and said, when the base in the new continent is established, let the mutant killer whale come back immediately. If Dagon intends to invade the material plane, I'm afraid that it will be needed to deal with the demonic sea monsters. Gloria shook her head and said, not yet. Most of the attacks now are from the water demons. However, there have been traces of swamp giants in the south recently. It seems like Dagon's followers have extended their tentacles to the ground. The sea goddess has also developed believers in the south coast. I heard that a group of refugees in the south has been taken in by her. They are currently on the northern coastline of Raging Sand Island. Soren nodded and said, what about the Duke of Red Dragon's wife? Gloria smiled and said, the Principality of Rossard is currently in internal strife. For the time being, it shouldn't be a threat to us. However, it seems that there are demons around her. Recently, many nobles of the Principality of Rossard have died in the hands of the lustful demons. We still need to be careful. Demons. Lustful demons? Soren seemed to have thought of something and murmured, she seems to have made a deal with a demon lord. Lustful demons? Could it be Glacia? The daughter of Asmodeus? Soren suddenly trembled. Then a series of information emerged from the depths of his mind. He finally remembered who the demon behind the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was. Queen of Yuma, Glacia. She was the archdemon of the 6th layer of the Bator Inferno, the daughter of the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. She was also one of the most active demon lords in the Bator Inferno. I see. Soren suddenly seemed to have understood something and said slowly, no wonder. No wonder. It's actually her. Some inadvertent clues were connected together. Soren immediately figured out the clue behind the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. However, if the one standing behind her was really Queen of Yuma, Glacia, then dealing with her would be a bit of a headache. Because pulling a carrot out of a hole would involve the Lord of Hell, which was a big problem. Queen of Yuma, Glacia's rise was completely the result of Asmodeus's own manipulation. He let his daughter become the new demon lord of the Bator Inferno. Such a setup must be for some conspiracy. Ever since she was promoted, Glacia had always wanted to prove her strength. Since she was involved in the material plane, then she must be plotting something. Anyway, it was definitely not a good thing for the South Coast. Got it. As if he thought of something, Soren's mouth revealed a trace of a malicious smile and said slowly, send someone to secretly send a message to the Church of the God of Light. There's no need to mention the relationship between the Duke of Red Dragon's wife and the Queen of Yuma. Just tell the Church of Light about the demons. Demons. This kind of enemy was too troublesome to deal with. Soren thought about it and felt that it was better to let the God of Light deal with them. He felt that he was too smart. He had to give himself a thumbs up. P.S. You guys are too fierce. You've flooded the public account with advertisements. Now that there are no more advertisements, if you want to support the author, you can tip on the public account. Chapter 807. A gentle wind blew through the green grass. There was a clear chirping of birds in the distance, and a cute deer came out of the grass. It looked around curiously, and then ran into the woods. A clear stream flowed along the trees, and a long-haired woman was sitting on a stone by the stream and playing a guqin. Next to her was a woman with a dignified and elegant face, who seemed to be listening to the sound of the wind with her eyes closed. Everything here was so beautiful. The woman with her eyes closed in meditation reached out and gently touched a budding flower, and then the flower bloomed in the wind. A beam of holy light appeared in this world. Everything here was so different from the material plane. There was no land full of holes, and there were no scars left by demons. This was an independent half-plane, a space opened by divine power. The light gradually gathered. Finally, it formed into the appearance of a tall man, who slowly walked down from the sky. Father. The elegant woman with her eyes closed in meditation opened her eyes. She bowed slightly to the man gathered by the light in the sky and said softly, "Why are you here?" The long-haired woman stopped playing. She humbly bowed her head to the light and shadow, as moving as a gentle spring. She was the goddess of river and lake. A god who was not very powerful. She was once protected by Mother Earth and now belonged to the goddess of agriculture. There were many gods like her who were born by nature and did not fight. Most of these gods were under the command of the goddess of agriculture. The god of light walked down from the sky. He looked radiant, filled with the aura of holiness and justice. Ever since he moved his divine kingdom to Mountain Paradise, the aura of the god of light began to be filled with a kind of holy light. When he fused with some kind of power from Mountain Paradise, he was also fused with some kind of holy thing. The goddess of agriculture frowned slightly. She did not know when it started, but she felt that the light on her father was too dazzling. The sun shone on everything and made plants grow, but if the light was too bright, it was not a good thing for everything. Although she was the daughter of the god of light, the goddess of agriculture preferred the breath of nature. After Mother Earth retired, she took over most of the clergy, but in the end, she chose agriculture as her core clergy. She knew her father's dream, to build an ideal country full of light, justice, and beauty. However, my father believes that to achieve this, we need to completely eliminate evil. Only by eliminating evil can we build a world of truth, goodness, and beauty. But the goddess of agriculture did not think so. She believed that evil could never be completely eliminated. If she wanted to make the world a better place, she had to change it in other ways. As a new god, the goddess of agriculture did not know how to make the world better. However, she believed that if everyone could live without worrying about food and clothing, perhaps there would be fewer disputes in the world. Therefore, the goddess of agriculture had always hoped to find a way to greatly improve agriculture and ensure that the world would not break out into war due to famine. Speaking of which, it had been a long time since they last met. Since the god of light entered the highest level of Mountain Paradise, they had not seen each other for hundreds of years. If it had not been for the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, they might not have seen each other for a long time. They might need an ancient text to describe the god of light. These words were engraved on a stone tablet in the Eastern Kingdom. It described what had happened when the god of light was still the light of dawn. Loshanda's friendly demeanor made him popular among the gods. However, compared with mortal believers, the gods have a longer memory. Although many gods appreciate Loshanda's active demands and his selfless and passionate beliefs, they still stop him to avoid causing too much damage to the status quo. He has a very good relationship with other noble-minded gods, such as the goddess of spring and the goddess of joy, as well as with those gods who actively seek happiness and kindness in life. The priesthood of creation he mastered allowed him to establish a friendly relationship with the god of knowledge, the god of singing, and the god of craftsmanship, and his deep hatred of the undead creatures made him a solid ally of Klemvox, the king of the dead. The goddess of earth seems to be the one who appreciates Loshanda's vitality the most among the gods. This may be because the god of dawn has been shining on her ancient soul. She and Loshanda both believe that their destinies are intertwined. Although their relationship has been on and off many times, they always give their all to each other wholeheartedly. Loshanda naively and stubbornly believes that the evil gods, such as the god of tyranny, the god of murder, the goddess of torture, and the god of destruction, are responsible for most of the misfortune and evil in the whole world. He especially hates the Lady of the Night. He believes that she represents the eternal power of corruption and is the dirty mastermind behind the evil conspiracy against him and the church. Loshanda believes that it was because the spies of the Lady of the Lost secretly sabotaged his efforts that the dawn attack happened. Therefore, he is trying to ensure that this will never happen again. That was the end of the ancient text. Below the tablet was a record of Loshanda's believers. The ancient chroniclers of the Eastern Kingdom believed that Loshanda's priests were a group of enthusiastic idealists. The god of light did not speak. He slowly came to the front of the goddess of agriculture and reached out to gently stroke her long hair. Holy light appeared, accompanied by a power full of light. Traces of black poisonous and evil aura seeped out of the goddess of agriculture's body. This was the hidden wound left by the Lady of Poison. In order to prevent the spread of the plague, the goddess of agriculture secretly fought with this evil goddess. "Thank you," the goddess of agriculture said softly. The god of light slowly shook his head. No one knew how powerful he was because he was already a great divine power when he was the king of dawn. His incarnation could remove the evil power of the goddess of agriculture with a wave of his hand. This kind of power was unimaginable even among the gods. Since entering Mountain Paradise, especially after taking over part of the clergy of justice, the gods had always believed that the god of light was the only one in the multiverse who could confront the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. In fact, this was exactly the case. The fall of the god of justice allowed Loshanda to take over the faith of the paladins. When the light of dawn became the blazing sun at noon, no evil or darkness could hide. "You seem to have contact with the new evil god, the god of half-elves and rogues?" Loshanda's voice finally sounded. This voice was full of supreme majesty that no one could violate or resist. This kind of question full of sacred breath. The goddess of agriculture frowned slightly and slowly said, "Yes." Her expression was a little repulsed. Since her father mastered the power of justice, some barriers inevitably occurred because of the field of clergy. Sometimes the goddess of agriculture would wonder if it was because of this that her mother separated from her. Her father was too radical. If it were not for him being so radical, the goddess of luck would not have died, and it would not have led to the appearance of the twins of fate. The struggle between the goddess of luck and the goddess of misfortune had always made the gods helpless. This kind of radicalism was even more intense after the destruction of the Arcane Empire. As a new god, the goddess of agriculture was not very clear about what happened during the Arcane Empire. But she still knew a few things. First, the destruction of the Arcane Empire was closely related to the gods, and there was also the shadow of the Lady of the Night. This ancient evil goddess was secretly manipulating something. The final disaster was probably inseparable from the internal struggle of the gods. Secondly, the destruction of the Arcane Kingdom brought a great disaster to the world. The entire material plane was on the verge of collapse, and countless creatures died as a result. The seeds of life were preserved only by relying on the glory of the gods. Otherwise, the creatures in the material plane would have died at that time. Third, everything after the destruction of the Arcane Empire led to the fall of the Father of the Oak, in order to save the world. This ancient god decided to sacrifice himself to save the natural world. At that time, the sky of the entire material plane was almost covered by dust. In the long, dark age, the sky of the entire material plane was gray, and there was no light at all. It was also at that time the light of dawn became the Lord of Light. The goddess of agriculture did not know what happened at that time because she was still too young for those ancient gods. She only knew that after that incident, her father changed from the neutral good camp to the lawful good camp. He spent a lot of divine power to transfer his kingdom from the Hall of Nature to Mountain Paradise. The light of dawn became the blazing sun at noon. In the last few years of the Dark Age, her father officially entered the divine system of Mountain Paradise, and in the following years, he broke the dust that shrouded the material plane and sprinkled the sun on the earth that was already full of holes. Since then, for the goddess of agriculture, her father had completely changed. She integrated the power of justice, light, and divine. In order to completely repair the damage of the material plane, she even entered the highest level of Mountain Paradise. It was also at that time that Mother Earth chose to live in seclusion. Mother Earth gave most of her clergy to the goddess of agriculture, and after the Dark Age, the goddess of agriculture began to learn how to become a god. For her father, the goddess of agriculture respected and even revered him. Because most people knew that, Father of the Oak, sacrificed selflessly to save nature, but no one knew how much effort Luo Shanda put in to bring light to the world in the dark age that followed. All of this was a secret. Perhaps for mortals, history just entered a turning point at this moment, and the once most powerful natural divine system fell. The main god of the natural divine system, father of the oak, fell. The light of dawn, with great divine power in the natural divine system, became the Lord of Light today. The ancient god of the natural divine system, Mother Earth, retired. From this moment on, the destruction of the arcane empire directly led to the withdrawal of the three gods with great divine power in the natural divine system from the stage of history. This was once the most powerful camp divine system in the pantheon, and since then, there had not been any great divine power. Today, the only gods left in the natural divine system were the goddess of forest, the goddess of agriculture, the goddess of unicorn, and so on. The most powerful among them was only intermediate divine power. The light of dawn was far away. The Lord of Light was rising. The goddess of agriculture was now a god between the natural divine system and the human divine system. She was sure that her mother, father, and father of the oak had reached some consensus. But she did not have a long divine life and did not know what they wanted to do. The Arcane Empire. There were too many mysteries behind this once glorious and brilliant civilization. The goddess of agriculture saw the resistance of mortals against the gods, and also saw the internal struggle of the gods. When the dust fell and everything was destroyed, she did not know who was the final winner. Mortals lost. Because the arcane empire had been destroyed, the power that once could fight against the gods had now become a ruin. The natural divine system had also lost. Father of the oak fell, Mother Earth retired, and the light of dawn turned into the Lord of Light. The whole natural divine system was almost collapsed. The goddess of agriculture could not help but let out a faint sigh. Everything in the past had already buried the drawbacks. Now that the Avatar crisis was coming, she had been worried that her father would be radical and want to do something terrible. It seemed that her prediction was not wrong. Because only she had interacted with the god of half-elves and rogues, of the evil camp, he had personally appeared in front of her today. Everything happened in a flash. The gods' thoughts were very fast because they needed to deal with the prayers of tens of thousands of believers. Don't have too much contact with him. The Lord of Light looked at the goddess of agriculture in front of him and said slowly, he is a person outside of fate. From a mortal to a weak god, in just 2 years, this kind of thing has only happened a few times in the long river of fate. I have a hunch. He will be a chess piece that affects the struggle of the gods. If you get too involved with him, I am afraid you will be in danger. The gods are watching him silently. The goddess of doom just saw more than us, so she left a mark on him. Everything he did was related to the arcane empire. This uncontrollable civilization will only bring unimaginable disasters to nature. The goddess of agriculture was silent. For a long time, she and her father had conflicting views. It was as if the Lord of Light thought that everything Soren did was just a copy of the arcane empire, but what she saw was another future, a future that was completely different from the arcane empire's unrestrained abuse of magic power. She saw a glimmer of hope in Soren. The goddess of agriculture had been silently observing the city of Mordor. The glimmer of hope she saw was reflected in an inconspicuous corner. It was not that no one had ever discovered the alchemy knowledge of the arcane empire. For example, in the Battle of the Rusty River, Droll fought with a wizard organization because of a seriously polluted river. In the end, even the legendary Droll could not help but fight in person. In the past history, any application of knowledge in the arcane empire would often bring serious pollution and destruction. For example, the experiment of the nature destroyer, Karina, the energy mutation of the Rusty River, and the destruction of the Blackwater town. Once these discovered knowledge were applied, they began to create wealth crazily, and then brought irreparable damage to nature. But this did not appear in the city of Mordor. Even, contrary to all this, the goddess of agriculture could clearly feel that the natural environment of the city of Mordor was changing, little by little, getting better little by little, and moving towards a future that even she could not predict. Thinking of this, the goddess of agriculture looked up into the eyes of the Lord of Light and shook her head slowly and firmly. Her father had his beliefs. She also had her own ideals. The will of the gods could never be so easily shaken by others. P.S. I went to the hospital yesterday. This chapter took a little long to write. Fu too needs to exercise more. Without health, it is useless to say anything. As long as I am healthy and can write, I can fight for another 30 years. If there is no update occasionally, I hope everyone can include a little more. Bow. Chapter 808. Shipwreck Bay. In this city, which was controlled by the Grey Forces, evil had never stopped growing. Soren's control of this place had never been completely completed. The most fundamental reason was that the forces in this city were intertwined, and it also involved the forces secretly controlled by other gods' churches. Any god's church had a good foundation. It was obviously not a wise choice to offend other gods' churches for the benefit of a city. So for a long time, Mordor City only controlled the slave trade here, and other aspects were still controlled by other forces. Even the Church of Wealth had privately built a very luxurious casino here. Recently, the forces of Mordor City were in a bit of trouble. Soren's crazy expansion finally had a drawback now, that was, many forces were enemies of Soren. In this case, they could be said to be gloating. If it weren't for the power of Mordor City, they would have already begun to fish in troubled waters. The situation was not clear enough. Many people were secretly observing here. Once Mordor City showed signs of weakness, it was very likely to be attacked by other forces. Some dark forces could not wait to jump out. For example, the vampires hidden in Shipwreck Bay. Recently, many vampires had joined the battle between Mordor City and the Shadow Thieves. Night fell. Night covered all the evil, and there was no one on the empty street. The pub that was usually lively and noisy had long been closed at this moment, but through the closed windows, many eyes could be found watching here. The patrol team had long disappeared, and there was no one on the whole street. Patter. There was a slight sound of landing, and then a thin and flexible figure emerged from the darkness. My lord. There was a trace of blood on Ugly Monkey's body, but it was not his. He knelt down on one knee in front of the man who was looking at the night sky with his back to him, and said in a deep voice, "The stronghold of the Shadow Thieves has been found. And the nest of the vampires has been figured out." Soren slowly turned around. He was expressionless at the moment, but his eyes were quite cold. He glanced at the eyes that were observing in the dark, and said in a deep voice, "Let's start." "Yes." Ugly Monkey bowed and retreated. Swoosh. A signal flare rose from the port. Then, in the darkness, strong and vigorous figures rushed out from the vicinity of the port. These people gathered like an army and quickly advanced forward. The army of Mordor was not mobilized. Soren sent the army stationed on Snake Island. The Drows were in charge of leading the team. They were all masters of assassination. The Wanderer of the Half-Elf Church also appeared, accompanied by a pretty girl, and beside her was an old man with a serious expression. The Archbishop of the Half-Elf Church. The battle had begun without a sound. Under the quiet night sky, the enemy's dying screams came. The power of Mordor City was divided into two. One of the troops led by the Drows raided the nest of the Shadow Thieves. Meanwhile, the troops led by Divine Priestess Milan directly attacked the vampire's lair. Anyone who offends Mordor City must pay the price. Soren's eyes were filled with murderous intent. His god-level senses were all locked onto a single spot below the sunken ship. Ancient vampires. An old monster that had been hiding for centuries. He was Soren's prey. Meow. Many figures were moving at high speed in the darkness. A petite figure suddenly emerged from the darkness. The next moment, 3 cold lights appeared, and then an enemy of the Shadow Thieves fell into a pool of blood. Lulu came out of the darkness. Compared to the past, she seemed a little more mature. This werewolf girl with amazing agility became more and more amazing after being trained by the drows. Felines were originally good at hunting, and Lulu's assassination skills were like a cheat. Later, even the drows in charge of training her were no match for her. This action was her first actual combat. She needed to prove her strength by herself. Poochie. Ugly Monkey sneered and pulled out the dagger that was inserted into the enemy's heart. The provocation of the shadow thieves had already aroused his anger. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't act rashly, he would have already retaliated against the shadow thieves. The dagger nimbly turned in a circle in his palm. Ugly Monkey tore a scroll to buff himself with the cat's grace, and then rushed directly toward the enemy's main camp. He was getting closer and closer to the legendary realm. Only a strong enough enemy could stimulate his potential to burst out. At the same time, in a dark lair, a group of vampires had gathered. Not good. Our graveyard has been conquered. A pale man rushed in from the outside and hurriedly said, "The enemy has a lot of priests. There are at least 3 legendary priests. There's no news from the shadow thieves. I'm afraid they won't be able to support us in time." Outside the nest, an old man in a gray robe walked in slowly. Behind him were 2 young priests and more than a dozen assassins trained by the half-elf church. Greater valor. Another light of magic appeared. The old man casually added a 3rd layer of buff to the others and then said, "Seal this place. Leave no one alive." He was the Archbishop from Autumn Fall. Although he had gradually moved away from the center of power in the city of Moder, this did not mean that their status had been reduced. They were still archbishops. And their strength had been upgraded to the legendary realm because of Soren's promotion to lesser god. These old archbishops usually trained the new generation to retire peacefully, but when needed, they could also transform into legendary combat power at any time. If it weren't for the influence of the Avatar crisis, with Soren's current divine level, at least 10 legendary priests could be directly promoted. Legendary divine power. On the other side, the divine priest, Milan, had also joined the battle. As a young female priest who could mobilize Soren's divine power, almost no dark creatures could stop her. She had been summoned by Soren's incarnation once, and her capacity for divine power was very strong. It was only a matter of time before she became a divine priest. "My lord, there are many shadow creatures in the south. Our losses are not small." A rogue covered in night clothes appeared. He knelt in front of Soren on one knee and said, "The shadow thief summoned many shadow creatures, and we also encountered some shadow wizards." Soren frowned slightly, then waved his hand and said, "Let the witches go. Leave the rest to the shadow dragon." As soon as he finished speaking, a terrible dragon's aura shrouded the sky over Shipwreck Bay, and a huge shadow quickly flew in the sky near the port. Immediately afterward, all the animals in the city knelt on the ground. The shadow dragon passed over Shipwreck Bay. It swooped down toward a corner in the north of the city and opened its mouth to spit out a dragon's breath. "Wizard Barity. The enemy is hiding in the basement. I'm afraid the losses will be great if we force an attack." The figure of the ugly monkey appeared. At this moment, there was a wound on his abdomen, but he looked quite excited and did not care at all. The excitement of the battle did not affect his judgment. After he found that the enemy was stubbornly resisting and trying to drag the battle into a quagmire, he immediately found the accompanying wizard. "Leave it to me." The wizard named Barity was a middle-aged woman. She looked forward with a cold expression, then turned to her apprentice and said, "Prepare the spell. I'll set up a teleportation beacon." At the same time, in the city of Mordor, thousands of miles away, there were also people gathering near Gloria's laboratory. Witches above the intermediate level gathered around the magic circle. "Space beacon lock. Activate portal number 1. Diamond golems assembled. Begin teleportation." The power of the elemental furnace gathered, and the expensive gems turned into powder. A portal opened directly in front of them, and then 3 diamond golems walked in with heavy steps. Rumble. The sound of a wall collapsing echoed over Shipwreck Bay. The enemy was more difficult to deal with than expected, but when Mordor City began to teleport golems into the battlefield, everything was doomed. In the darkness, all the spying eyes were filled with horror. Those who were secretly observing and trying to figure out the strength of Mordor City with the help of the Shadow Thief were all afraid at this moment. Because the strength they saw in front of them was completely beyond their ability to compete with. Even if Soren wanted, the entire Shipwreck Bay would completely fall today. Come. Gather everyone and deal with the Shadow Thief immediately. These guys broke the rules of Shipwreck Bay. We must teach them a lesson today. A big man with a beard stood up, glanced at the others in front of him, and said in a deep voice, "These guys colluded with the vampires. We must teach them a lesson today." 4 or 5 leaders of the gray area of Shipwreck Bay gathered together. One of them seemed to have not reacted and said, "Didn't we want to use the power of the Shadow Thief to attack Mordor City? Why are we helping them deal with the Shadow Thief now?" "Pa." The middle-aged man stared at him and said in a deep voice, "Take your people and go now. Don't ask so much. If you don't want to be punished by Mordor City, hurry up and say something now." The words were said so straightforwardly, how could the others not understand? These people in the gray area may not be able to deal with the strong, but they were very active in beating up the weak. These guys were a group of fence-sitters. Now that they were shocked by the power of Mordor City, the first thing they thought of was to quickly stand in line to avoid being punished by Mordor City after defeating the Shadow Thief. The battle was still going on, but the result had already been decided. Soren's figure suddenly disappeared, and the next moment, he appeared in an ancient tomb. Hee hee. A strange laughter emerged, and then a figure walked out of the darkness. He was carrying the body of a Shadow Thief in his hand. It was the assassin cultivated by Mordor City, but he was already dead at this moment. This man who looked a bit like a mummy threw away the body that had no blood and laughed strangely, "Another one coming to die? Yes. It seems that your blood will taste good. Ancient vampire. Challenge rating 18 and above." Many of them were old monsters that had been hiding for centuries. Ha! The light was slightly brighter, and the ancient vampire in front of him had an expression of someone coming to die. But after seeing Soren's appearance clearly, he couldn't help but tremble, and then a look of horror appeared on his face. The god of half-elves and rogues. Extreme horror. After confirming the identity of Soren, the ancient vampire in front of him didn't even think about it. He directly transformed into a bat, and then fled frantically outside. What a joke. The only one who came in was a legendary rogue. Such an enemy was nothing to him at all. But when he realized that the one in front of him was a true god, and it was the infamous Sauron of the South Coast, he was so scared that he almost peed himself on the spot. Not running? Not running now? Waiting for death here? Huh? Soren's expression was a little surprised, and then he calmed down. He had encountered a lot of battles along the way, but today's situation was the first time he encountered such a situation. An ancient vampire with a monster level of more than 25 actually ran away in fear after seeing him. This was the first time in his 2 lifetimes. It really gave him the illusion that he had unknowingly become a big boss. It shouldn't be an illusion. Soren should be a big boss now. If it was converted into the template used by adventurers in the past, he was not only a big boss, but also a leader-level boss at divine difficulty. God of half-elves and rogues. Master of Mordor City. God Slayer. Death Walker. Polymath. Pirate King. Ruler of the 3 seas. With this row of titles, Soren didn't look like a normal leader boss. It was impossible to escape. The battle didn't last too long. An ancient vampire could no longer pose any threat to Soren. After killing the ancient vampire in front of him, a ring in Soren's dimensional space suddenly moved, and then he took it out. It was the divine artifact ring obtained from the demigod vampire, a grade 1 divine artifact. A little bit of blood-red light emerged. Under the effect of the divine artifact ring, the body of the ancient vampire that was killed in front of him suddenly twitched, and then quickly weathered into dust. Then a drop of strange dark red blood appeared directly in front of Soren's eyes. True blood? It seems to be a vampire's thing. Soren glanced at it and kept it in the dimensional space. This thing might be useful in the future. The battle in Shipwreck Bay continued. This night, the enemies of the South Coast who dared to provoke Mordor City were destined to pay a huge price. P.S. Some readers said that since they followed Futu's public account, they felt that they couldn't keep up with the nutrition. Is there such a thing? Those fantasy-style beauty pictures are for you to see, not for you to f***ck. Chapter 809. The balance of victory and defeat had been decided. The Guild of Shadow Thieves in Shipwreck Bay was completely caught off guard by Mordor's attack. This time, Soren intended to destroy the Guild of Shadow Thieves in Shipwreck Bay in one fell swoop, so he sent out quite a lot of men. The battle outside was still going on, but Soren's side was almost over. Vampires might be troublesome for mortals, but they were nothing more than ants to the gods. Soren had not encountered a decent enemy from the beginning to the end. Even the ancestor-level vampires could not compete with him now. Outside a serene tomb. After cleaning up a group of high-grade vampires, Soren walked out from the depths of the tomb. But the moment he came out, he frowned and said sarcastically, "You're finally willing to show up. Lord of Shadows." The surrounding space was gray and hazy, and everything seemed to be covered in shadows. This space had been affected and interfered with by the shadow plane, temporarily sealing off space-related abilities. The only one who could do this was the Lord of Shadows, because he held the priesthood of Shadow. A cold light appeared. A gray figure came from the darkness. Soren didn't even look at it. He waved his hand, and a bloody light appeared. "Don't let these small fries die." Soren's mouth showed a sarcastic smile, and he said slowly, "As the god in charge of the Shadow, and Rogue, we are destined to fight. You still don't dare to show up?" Although he said that, Soren couldn't help but move his feet at this moment. At the same time, a mark engraved on the surface of his palm near his wrist was slightly activated by him. This was a space waymark. Although the surrounding environment had been assimilated by the shadow plane, as long as this waymark was sent out, naturally someone could locate Soren's approximate location. Haha. A strange laughter appeared. Then a black shadow came from midair. Soren frowned and waved his hand, and a high-level distorted shadow was killed by him. "How long are you going to waste on me? If you don't act now, all of my men will be here soon." The Shadow Lord must have used up a lot of divine energy to seal this space. Soren didn't believe that he would be able to hold himself back forever. This guy was too careful. Soren didn't dare to act rashly. After all, if he summoned the Princess Royal before the Shadow Lord showed up, it would be very difficult to find the Shadow Lord in the future. Time ticked by. At this time, the battle outside the tomb was about to end, and the people of Mordor were approaching. A god in the form of a saint could not ignore a legendary master. If the church's people gathered, the Shadow Lord would not have a chance to kill Soren. Puff! A pitch-black shadow appeared and turned into a sharp blade that headed straight for Soren. He has finally shown himself. Soren was suddenly energized. He didn't even think about it, nor did he have any intention of dodging. He instantly activated his divine shield and pounced forward. Tracking, divinity. Soren caught the shadow that was distorted between the shadow plane and the material plane. In the vision of a god, a half-illusory, half-real figure appeared in his perception. A god's avatar? Soren frowned and sneered, "Do you think a mere avatar can kill me?" A distorted shadow. It didn't look like a real body, but it had a vague outline of a human. The form of a god was uncertain. If they wanted to change, they could turn their bodies into various half-energy forms. The Shadow Lord had obviously transformed himself into a shadow being, so he looked like he had no flesh at all. If it was a battle between the gods, Soren and the Shadow Lord should be 3-7, and the Shadow Lord would have a very high chance of winning. But if it was just a god's avatar against Soren's body, the outcome would be 80-20. Basically, the avatar of the Shadow Lord would not be able to kill Soren. Is he trying to test my strength? As soon as Soren thought about it, he immediately had a plan. In an instant, he turned into a shadow and rushed up. For a long time. Most of Soren's enemies were mortals, and the number of times he had fought with gods could be counted on one hand. But because of this, many gods were not very clear about Soren's specific strength. At present, the only benchmark that could measure Soren's strength was that he had successfully killed the god of the hunt, Malor. But this was only a vague guess. The last attack could not rule out the possibility that the Shadow Lord was trying to test Soren's strength. Unfortunately, the effect was not shown at all, and the Lady of Silvermoon directly blocked the attack for Soren. This time, the Shadow Lord's avatar appeared to test Soren's strength. Since you dared to send your avatar here, then I won't be polite with the divinity value of your avatar. A sneer appeared on Soren's face. He activated his tracking divinity and instantly locked onto the position of the Shadow Lord's avatar. But after all, the enemy was in charge of the shadow divinity. In order to avoid Soren's tracking, the Shadow Lord's avatar appeared almost instantaneously. It only appeared in the material plane when it attacked, and at other times, it was in the shadow plane. In this case, if Soren wanted to cause effective damage to the Shadow Lord, he could only counterattack at the moment when the Shadow Lord attacked. If a god's avatar died, under normal circumstances, it would only reduce the power of the god by a little. But Soren was different from others. If he killed the avatar of a god, then the divinity and divinity of the avatar could be absorbed. The avatar of the Shadow Lord could now travel through the planes. There was no doubt that when the Shadow Lord created this avatar, it injected the power of divinity into it. Killing it would absorb the divinity value. Alter reality, divinity power. With a little cold light once again attacking Soren from the shadow plane, he did not hesitate to activate his divinity power. In a battle at the level of the gods, the secular means were limited. Only the power of the rules could fight against it. In today's situation, if it were other legendary professions, they would be completely defeated by the enemy from the shadow plane. Except for the top spellcasters, they would have no ability to fight back at all. Everything around was distorted. The rules of reality were interfered with by the divinity power. The shadows around Soren were like flowing water. Alter space, divinity power. Soren continued to use divinity value in an instant. It was as if it directly broke the seal of the shadow. The next moment, a distorted shadow appeared in his sight. Want to run? The power of alter space had just broken the restrictions of the plane's rules. The avatar of the Shadow Lord felt that something was wrong and wanted to escape. But how could Soren give it a chance? Epic divine power. Dimensional lock, divine power transformation. In order to prevent the enemy from entering the shadow plane again, Soren simply blocked his own space ability. In an instant, he turned into a shadow and rushed over. He poured his divine power into his weapon and attacked with a storm-like attack. But what happened next made him frown. Even though the shadow in front of him was shredded by him, it didn't cause much substantial damage. The shredded shadow began to gather on its own and quickly turned into a human silhouette. Immune to physical damage? Soren seemed to realize something. He raised his hand and blasted out a divine power shock wave. This guy was really difficult to deal with. An avatar was actually immune to physical damage. According to the calculation of the ability of the Saint template, the Shadow Lord was probably immune to the effects of level 1 to 4 spells. No wonder he dared to send an avatar to test him. With this kind of talent, other people simply could not do anything. Physical damage was basically ineffective. The energy resistance of the gods was frighteningly high. At the same time, they were also immune to all level 1 to 4 spells. If he could not block the space, it was almost impossible to kill the enemy. Melf's Minute Meteor. The divine power shock wave really had an effect. The distorted shadow obviously became a lot weaker. However, Soren's divine power points were not inexhaustible. He was not sure whether the Shadow Lord's real body was nearby, and he did not dare to directly summon the Princess Royal to alert the enemy, so he could not squander all his divine power points. If he wanted to kill the enemy, he could only rely on the legendary god-slaying spell, Melf's Minute Meteor. This spell not only had physical damage, but also very powerful magic damage. Rumble. 2 burning minute meteor flames appeared in Soren's palm, followed by a storm of attacks. Explosions sounded one after another. Soren did not know how many rounds of ammunition he had thrown out. Anyway, he did not stop until he had used up all the spell slots of Melf's Minute Meteor flames that he had memorized. The Minute Meteor flames created by this spell were an area of effect attack. Although it only dealt a few points of damage each time, it could not withstand Soren's attack speed. The low-level spells were all instantaneous. After a round of Minute Meteor flames, the avatar of the Shadow Lord was only left with a very weak afterimage. It's not dead yet. Soren could not help but hesitate for a moment, but he still raised his hand decisively and pointed. Death's hand, Death Realm. In this case, the enemy should have entered a state of near death. There was nothing to say. He just directly used the ability to kill. Boom! The distorted shadow around shattered in an instant, and then there was a clamor of people around. The avatar of the Shadow Lord was killed on the spot, but then a ball of divine light emerged from the dissipating shadow. The power of this divinity did not return to the Shadow Lord, but was directly devoured by Soren. A row of data appeared in front of him, killed, Shadow Lord's avatar. Extracting slaughter EXP from target. You've gained 250,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divine power. Extracting divine power from target. You've gained 12 divine power. Target has divine power. Extracting divine power from target. You've gained 6 divine power. Looking at the data prompt that appeared in front of him, Soren's expression suddenly became very interesting. At the same time, in a mysterious underground palace, a humanoid shadow that appeared on an altar suddenly let out a low roar full of unwillingness and anger. The whole palace was trembling. Many of the believers of the Shadow Lord gathered here could not help but tremble. They did not understand why the god they served was suddenly so angry. How dare you send an avatar to test me? Soren smiled and shook his head. You're asking for it. He had the power of the slaughter divinity. Any avatar of a god that was killed by him, the divinity and divine power would be devoured by him. When Soren fought against the Ascendant, Eugene summoned the half-orc heroic spirit from the ancestral kingdom. It was only an avatar that died in the hands of Soren, but even the ancestral kingdom itself fell directly. Gods would not fall because of the death of their avatars. However, the divinity in the avatar was absolutely impossible to return. The amount of divinity and divine power that was injected into the avatar when the Shadow Lord created it was the same amount that Soren absorbed after killing it. These divinity and divine power were permanently lost. When he thought of the permanent reduction of 12 points of divinity and 6 points of divinity due to the death of the Shadow Lord's avatar, Soren felt very, very good. He even wanted the Shadow Lord to send a few more avatars over. This was simply killing monsters for him to level up. And it was still reducing the enemy's strength and increasing his own strength at the same time. However, the Shadow Lord had suffered a loss today, and he probably would not dare to let his avatar appear in front of Soren in the future. Tracking, divinity. Although the avatar of the Shadow Lord had been killed, there were still clues left behind in the avatar's divine power. Soren activated his tracking divinity and locked onto the aura and divine power of the Shadow Lord. At the same time, he left a soul mark with his god-level perception. In the future, as long as he found something related to the Shadow Lord, he could rely on the power of tracking divinity to track the clues and marks of the Shadow Lord to a certain extent. It was only a matter of time before he found his hiding place. Outer Islands, Mordor City. Yesterday's battle was over. After presiding over the battle in Shipwreck Bay, Gloria immediately devoted all her energy to her own research. It was about noon. Fallen Witch's figure appeared in the laboratory. Her expression seemed to be quite surprised, and she said, "It's a success. I've successfully studied the thing that Soren brought back. This seems to be a special spell from the Arcane Empire. The great arcanists can use it to do many special things." Gloria raised her head, gently lifted her long hair and said, "Really? How is the effect of this spell?" As soon as her voice fell outside the laboratory, Fallen Witch's voice sounded again. Then another Fallen Witch appeared in front of Gloria and slowly said, "The effect is amazing. Although the requirements for mind control are very high. But this spell does have a very amazing effect." There were two Fallen Witch. They looked almost exactly the same. If one didn't have the perception of a legendary, one wouldn't be able to find any difference at all. Gloria's expression was suddenly full of shock. The Fallen Witch waved her hand, and her original self disappeared. Then she said, "Although the effect is amazing, it's still very effective. But it doesn't last long enough. It's not easy to control the spell. It feels like controlling two bodies at the same time. As far as I know, many spellcasters in the Arcane Empire could control many avatars at the same time to deal with many different things. This spell definitely had some areas that weren't perfect yet. It may be related to some of the supreme magic skills in the Arcane Empire. P.S. 2 in 1 chapter. It's starting to be updated normally. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.